It was an autumn morning in New York, and the Empire Grand Hotel, with its impressive, immaculate facade of glass and steel, reflected the dawn's glow like a monument to opulence and luxury. Inside, the wide, well-lit hallways with crystal chandeliers and Italian marble exuded exclusivity. Among floral arrangements and sophisticated furniture, impeccably uniformed staff moved with precision, starting yet another day of catering to elite guests. The Empire Grand was the heart of Grand Enterprises, a globally renowned luxury hotel chain, and every detail in the environment reflected the grandeur that name carried. At the top of the group's command chain was 30-year-old Ethan Grand, the eldest son of the conglomerate's CEO. Ethan was known in the industry for his relentless coolness, critical eye, and aversion to any form of sentimentality. His name was synonymous with discipline, perfectionism, and results. As a member of one of the most influential families in the sector, he had learned early on the importance of image and efficiency. In the eyes of the Empire Grand staff, Ethan was almost a myth, rarely present but always watchful. His mere presence at the hotel made everyone straighten their posture and perfect their smiles even more. Rumors of his seriousness only added to the mystery. Some even said he had a particular disdain for fake smiles and forced friendliness, which he saw as shallow attempts to win guests' goodwill. To him, the hotel should function like a machine, flawless, emotionless. On this day, Ethan was conducting a surprise inspection at the hotel. He wore a custom dark suit, each detail strategically calculated to reflect power and discretion. He walked through the lobby with a closed expression, his gaze sharp as if every minor detail were under scrutiny. While Ethan inspected the lobby, Lana Brooks, one of the Empire Grand's most beloved receptionists, was starting her shift with her usual enthusiasm. Lana embodied everything Ethan couldn't stand: warm, smiling, and genuinely kind. Hailing from a small town in Texas, Lana had moved to New York in search of a career and a new life. The Empire Grand had been her dream since she set foot in the city, and she had finally secured the receptionist position after years of hard work. To her, the hotel was more than a job, it was an achievement. With her uniform perfectly aligned and a radiant smile, Lana was an unmistakable presence at the reception. She knew the names of regular guests, remembered their preferences, and made it her mission to turn each stay into a unique experience. Lana had the gift of making people feel special, one of the reasons so many guests admired her and preferred to be attended by her. But that morning, Lana would have her first encounter with Ethan Grand, and everything would unfold unexpectedly and intensely. Lana was attending to an important guest, Mr. Mitchell, a businessman from Chicago who frequently stayed at the Empire Grand. Mr. Mitchell was known for his difficult temperament and high demands. Nevertheless, Lana kept her usual smile and patience, meeting each of his requests. She listened attentively, responding in her calm tone and focused stance. When Mr. Mitchell began to complain about the room view, demanding an immediate change. "I requested a room with a view of Central Park. How could you place me in a room facing the avenue? I've been staying in this hotel for years." "I expected better treatment," he grumbled, impatient. "I understand, Mr. Mitchell," Lana replied calmly. "I apologize for the mix-up, and I'll do my best to correct it right away." She began searching the system for an appropriate room, maintaining her gentle smile and kind eyes on the guest, even as he continued to complain. At that moment, Ethan approached, drawn by Mitchell's audible complaints, observing the situation with a critical eye. Upon seeing Lana attending to the guest with what, to him, seemed like an exasperatingly rehearsed smile, he felt a flash of irritation. Without hesitation, Ethan interrupted. "What's happening here?" His sharp voice made Lana and Mr. Mitchell turn to face him at the same time. She immediately recognized who he was: Ethan Grand in person. He rarely appeared, and his presence there only meant that the moment had the potential to turn into a nightmare. Without losing her composure, Lana tried to explain. "Mr. Mitchell would like a room with a view of Central Park. but it appears there was an error in his reservation. I'm resolving it so that we can accommodate his preference." But before she could continue, Ethan looked directly at her, completely disregarding the gentleness in her voice. "Do you think a smile solves everything, miss? Or is it just a distraction to cover up a basic service error?" The cold accusation hit Lana, who felt unfairly judged. She knew she was doing her best to resolve the situation, but Ethan's icy eyes made it clear that, to him, nothing she said would change his initial impression. Lana took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I apologize if it seemed like I'm not taking the issue seriously, sir. I'm resolving the situation as quickly as possible." Ethan cast a look that could have pierced concrete. Instead of smiling, "Maybe it would be more productive to ensure our guests are properly accommodated from the start." Mr. Mitchell, sensing the tension, backed away, muttering something about returning later. With him out of the picture, Lana and Ethan were left face to face. She tried to process the feeling of humiliation and anger while still maintaining her professional posture. However, he walked away without another word, leaving her standing there, embarrassed and somewhat stunned. After the incident, Lana felt the weight of her colleagues' gazes on her. She had never been reprimanded like that, especially not in front of a guest, let alone by Ethan Grand, the heir of the empire she admired so much. But instead of letting it get to her, she decided to use that moment as motivation. If Ethan thought she was just a smiling receptionist, he was mistaken. Lana vowed that, if necessary, she would show him she was far more than he presumed. Throughout the day, the incident kept echoing in her mind, each cold word and disdainful look replayed in detail. As hard as she tried to ignore it, she felt a mix of anger and determination growing within her. Meanwhile, Ethan, in his office at the hotel, reviewed reports and departmental requests. He tried to dismiss the thought of the smiling receptionist, but something about her bothered him. She seemed different. Ethan didn't want to admit it, but the way she handled the guest, even under pressure, wasn't something one saw in just any employee. There was an authenticity in Lana that he didn't understand, and perhaps because of that, he felt this aversion to her. Later, he found himself watching Lana from a distance as she interacted with other guests and colleagues. Even after the reprimand, there she was, attending to everyone with that same calm smile, that genuine demeanor that defied everything he believed about the hotel industry. He began to realize that his initial disdain might have been more about rejecting something he didn't understand. As he left the hotel that night, Ethan found himself thinking about her again. He tried to understand where this resistance to her unexpectedly strong and positive presence came from. But he wasn't the type of man to easily admit curiosity, especially for an employee of such a lower rank. But that first impression had been planted, and although both had walked away with a negative image of each other, neither knew that this encounter was the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. Lana walked quickly through the corridors of the Empire Grand, keeping her face steady and her body upright, but inside she felt a mix of emotions that made her dizzy. She had spent the rest of the morning trying to hide her frustration after the confrontation with Ethan Grand. The situation had left her angry, of course, but also hurt. It was unfair that someone who barely knew her routine and dedication had the right to judge her publicly like that. Ethan had looked at her with disdainful coldness, as if she were no more than a small dispensable piece in the vast puzzle he controlled. Entering the employee break room, Lana allowed herself to take a deep breath and close her eyes for a moment, gathering her calm before returning to work. She needed a few minutes to clear her mind and put an end to what had happened. She wouldn't let Ethan Grand intimidate her, she thought with determination. She wouldn't let a single destructive encounter ruin all the effort she had put into this job. "Hey, Lana." Mary's voice, her co-workers, pulled her out of her thoughts. Mary was one of the longest-serving employees at the Empire Grand, known for her wisdom and good humor. With a gentle smile, she handed Lana a cup of coffee, which she gratefully accepted. "I was thinking about you after what happened this morning," Mary said. with a sympathetic look. It was a bit unfair, Lana sighed, looking at the steaming coffee in her hands. It was, but at the same time, I know I have to get used to the idea that people like him are like that. They don't see us as human, just as pieces in a big machine. Mary chuckled softly. Can I tell you something? I've been working here for years, and I've seen Ethan Grant make a lot of people give up in their first few days. He has a keen eye for flaws and loves to point them out. But he's also the type who, when he singles someone out, it's because he's seen something important. Maybe he saw something in you that made him want to test your abilities. Lana thought for a moment about what Mary had said. Something important? She wasn't sure she believed that. The way Ethan had looked at her didn't seem to carry curiosity or genuine interest. On the contrary, it seemed like he saw her as an amateur, a distraction, someone who was only there to look good. But regardless of what he thought, Lana knew she couldn't let it get her down. "Thank you, Mary," she said with a faint smile. "But I won't let this affect me. I have dreams, and I'm going to fight for them, with or without Mr. Ethan Grant's approval." As Lana returned to work, Ethan continued paying close attention to every detail of the Empire Grand, analyzing the hotel's structure and operations. He passed through the lobby from time to time without really engaging with the staff, as was his custom. But there was a distraction that bothered him, the image of the determined-eyed, easy-smiling receptionist he had reprimanded in front of a guest. He could easily ignore most of the hotel staff. Generally, they were efficient but replaceable people. But Lana seemed different. He remembered the way she maintained her composure, even with the harsh words he had said to her. Yet that smile persisted, and she hadn't wavered for a second. Deep down, this intrigued him, and at the same time, it irritated him. Why would someone keep smiling after being treated that way? Was there something real in that smile? Something beyond his control? He was beginning to realize that Lana wasn't like other employees, who maintained friendliness only as a superficial layer, but rather someone who genuinely seemed to enjoy what she did. This was hard for him to understand. Ethan was used to approaching work strategically, almost mechanically, and any trace of emotion seemed unnecessary. Sitting in his office, he found himself recalling Lana's face and how she handled Mr. Mitchell, maintaining calm and professionalism. He knew he could easily forget the matter and move on, but something inside him stopped him. Why? It was a question he tried to ignore, but no matter how much he focused on hotel reports, Lana's image haunted him. The following days passed in a similar routine. Lana remained focused, serving each guest with her characteristic warmth. She knew that Ethan was often at the hotel and that in some way, he was watching her. She could feel his keen gaze behind cold lenses every time he passed through the lobby. However, she didn't let herself be intimidated. Whenever he looked at her, she simply continued her work with the same smile. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of showing weakness. The employees began to notice the tension between them and discreetly commented on the interest the heir to the empire seemed to show in Lana, even though he was the type who never engaged with the team. And even if it was veiled curiosity, it was evident enough for everyone to notice. Lana's co-workers began to comment on Ethan's glances, and although she would smile and change the subject, she knew there was something beyond that simple observation. One night, at the end of her shift, Lana stayed to organize some documents at the reception. She was alone in the lobby, focused on her work, when she noticed Ethan approaching. He looked as serious as ever, but upon seeing her alone, he stopped, as if he wanted to say something. "Lana, isn't it?" he asked, attempting to soften the formality. She looked up, surprised that he remembered her name. "Yes, sir." For a few moments, he seemed to reflect, looking around before turning his gaze back to her. "I wanted to understand. Do you really like this job?" The question was so unexpected that it took Lana a few seconds to process it. With a light smile, she replied, "Yes, sir. I've always wanted to work here." Ethan frowned, as if the concept of enjoying one's work was foreign to him. But dealing with people all the time, smiles, complaints, doesn't it tire you? She smiled, with a serene sparkle in her eyes. Of course, some days are tough, but I feel that, in some way, I can brighten people's day. Making someone feel good in a place as big, and sometimes lonely as this is, gratifying. The simplicity in her answer left Ethan speechless. He didn't quite know how to respond to that. Why would someone choose a job for something as subjective as helping people? In his world, everything had a financial purpose, a logical justification. Lana's perspective was, for him, something new and unsettling. Interesting, he said, more to himself than to her. Well, continue with your work. He turned and walked away, leaving Lana both confused and curious. That brief interaction made her wonder if, in some way, Ethan was questioning how he viewed his own work. She could sense there was something behind that distant gaze, something he struggled to hide. Maybe he too was trapped in something he couldn't understand. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Lana's response. His analytical mind tried to process it as information, but what she had said wasn't exactly quantifiable. In the business world, no one brightened anyone's day. People wanted status, power, results. But Lana seemed content with something much simpler, and for the first time in years, Ethan found himself trying to understand something beyond financial transactions and agreements. The more he thought about what Lana had said, the more he questioned his own concept of success and satisfaction. In his formative years, Ethan had learned that showing weakness was unacceptable. He had been trained to be pragmatic, analytical, and to keep his distance from emotions. At home, he was taught to believe that any sign of vulnerability could be exploited by competitors. He was a machine programmed for results. But seeing Lana, a low-ranking hotel employee, dealing with daily challenges with a joy that seemed genuine, he began to question himself. And perhaps without realizing it, Lana was affecting Ethan more deeply than anyone had ever done before. The morning began with unusual frenzy at the Empire Grand Hotel. The doors of the event hall were open, and decoration, security, and organizing teams moved quickly to ensure everything was impeccable for the charity event that would take place that night. This event wasn't only crucial for the hotel, but also for Ethan Grand himself. The Empire Grand would host the annual auction for the Hope Institute, a renowned charity supporting educational programs for underprivileged children. Important personalities from New York, along with influential business and social figures, were among the guests, and the event's success would directly reflect on the public image of the hotel and Ethan himself. Ethan had been on site since early morning, coordinating with each team, overseeing every detail, and making sure everything would turn out perfectly. It was not unusual for Ethan to assume this level of control, especially for high-visibility events. To him, everything had to meet the unquestionable standard of the Empire Grand and the image of perfection that the grand name demanded. Every decision, from the menu to the floral design, had to be approved by Ethan, who trusted no one else with these details. When Lana arrived at the hotel and saw the unusual activity in the lobby, she was immediately informed about the event. The reception team would be in full operation to ensure the guests were well received, and Lana, with her captivating charm, would be one of those responsible for directly attending to the high-profile guests. Unlike other days, when her work was more routine and focused on regular guests, today she would need to give special attention to people accustomed to the highest level of service. Taking a deep breath, Lana adjusted her uniform blazer and mentally prepared for what she knew would be an intense night. She understood the importance of the event and wanted to do her best. However, her spirits took a hit when she saw Ethan in the lobby, instructing a group of employees with his usual serious, unwavering expression. He spoke with precision, his tone low and firm, and Lana felt a knot in her stomach at the thought that they might have to interact directly that night. When Ethan finally noticed her, His eyes assessed her briefly and critically before he gave a slight nod. It seemed he accepted her as part of the night's team, but the truth was that Lana felt additional pressure, knowing she would be under Ethan's watchful eye the entire time. As the event approached, the hotel transformed. Employees lined up to rehearse the guests' reception. Waiters and chefs worked at full speed to prepare the cocktail and dinner, and the hall's lighting and decorations were completed. The sparkle of the chandeliers complemented the delicate floral arrangements, giving the space an elegant and sophisticated atmosphere that remained inviting. Finally, as night fell over New York, guests began arriving. Limousines and luxury cars lined up at the Empire Grand entrance, and Lana, alongside other staff members, was positioned to welcome them with her usual smile. Ethan, however, remained in the background, observing the lobby and ensuring that nothing went out of control. As high society personalities passed through reception, Lana greeted each one with grace and attention, maintaining her firm posture and warm smile. Each greeting was sincere, and every gesture reflected her genuine desire to provide a welcoming experience. Lana felt in her element, something that didn't go unnoticed by Ethan, who observed her closely from his vantage point. Halfway through the event, an incident tested Lana's skills. One of the VIP guests, a businessman who was part of the event's organizing committee, complained that his name wasn't included on the main dinner list. The situation was particularly delicate as he was accompanied by several other executives, all prominent figures in the financial sector. His anger and embarrassment were visible, and he started to show irritation. As always, attentive, Ethan moved closer to ensure the situation didn't escalate. Just as he was about to intervene, Lana stepped forward. "Mr. Bradford, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm sure it was a misunderstanding," she said calmly, her voice firm and serene. "I will personally ensure that you and your guests are seated in the best possible spot. The Empire Grand values your presence and thanks you for being here to support the charity event." Lana's confidence seemed to disarm the businessman, who looked at her curiously. After a few more words from her, he finally calmed down and accepted the new arrangements. Ethan observed everything closely, impressed by her ability to handle the incident, without losing her composure and without any trace of discomfort on her face. She appeared calm, in control. For the first time, Ethan realized that Lana wasn't just a receptionist with an easy smile, but someone with an authentic ability to stay composed in difficult situations. Shortly after the incident, the auction began in the main hall. Ethan remained attentive to every detail, but each time he looked at Lana, he noticed something new. There was something about her demeanor, a balance between professionalism and warmth, that he found almost intriguing. It wasn't as if she were trying to impress anyone, and perhaps that was precisely what impressed him. She didn't seem to be there to prove anything to anyone. Her dedication was evident, but natural, like an extension of who she was. As the auction continued, with high-value artworks and items being bid on, Lana moved with agility and confidence, assisting guests and supporting other employees. There was a sparkle in her eyes that showed how much she believed in her work, how much it meant to her. Ethan, despite himself, found himself admiring that energy, that ability of hers to maintain balance amidst the chaos. He found it almost impossible to ignore her. At one point, one of the waiters accidentally dropped a tray of wine glasses near the entrance to the hall. The sound of breaking glass caught the attention of everyone nearby, and the waiter, visibly embarrassed, quickly began to clean up. Several guests glanced disdainfully at the scene, some quietly commenting on the lack of preparedness of the staff. Lana, who was nearby, approached the waiter, leaning down to help him pick up the pieces. Ethan, who was close enough to hear, heard her murmur with an encouraging smile, "Don't worry, it happens to everyone. We'll sort this out in no time." With her support, the waiter regained his composure, and soon both of them had cleared the area and ensured that guests could pass without issue. Ethan, watching everything, felt a wave of surprise at how Lana handled the small crises that arose. She wasn't the type to point fingers or place blame. On the contrary, She was willing to help solve any problem, no matter how small. For someone like Ethan, who had been raised in an environment where the focus was always on results and where mistakes were unacceptable, seeing the humanized way Lana treated all employees was disconcerting, but also refreshing. When the auction concluded with an impressive amount raised, Ethan finally felt relieved. The event had been a success, and the guests appeared satisfied. He knew that much of this success was due to the staff's commitment, and especially to Lana. For the first time, perhaps in years, he felt something close to admiration for someone in a lower position than his. Lana's simplicity contrasted so much with everything he knew that, in a way, it disarmed him. After the official end of the event, Ethan went to the lobby to watch as the last guests left. Lana, still there, ensuring everyone was attended to, noticed his presence and offered a smile, this time without the formality she usually reserved for guests. "It was a wonderful event," she remarked, still with the light of dedication in her eyes. "I hope you're pleased with the outcome." Ethan looked at her for a few seconds, hesitating. He could feel that, in that moment, he could express something more personal, but his usual cold instinct kept him rigid. "Yes, the event was a success, and you were efficient in keeping things under control." He saw a spark of surprise in Lana's eyes, as if she hadn't expected any form of praise. Ethan wasn't known for offering compliments, especially to someone he had criticized recently. He realized that this simple acknowledgement meant more to her than he intended to reveal. As the guests finally left, silence began to fill the lobby. The employees cleaned up the last traces of the event, and little by little, the Empire Grand returned to its state of tranquility. Lana, exhausted but satisfied, exchanged a final glance with Ethan before grabbing her things and leaving. Alone in the lobby, Ethan reflected on the night. For the first time, he realized that someone, a mere receptionist, had infiltrated his thoughts, challenging his beliefs and showing him that perhaps there were different values than those he had been raised with. And as he looked out at the city through the Empire Grand's glass facade, one thing became clear. Lana was not just an employee, but a presence that, somehow, changed the environment around her. And without knowing it, Lana was beginning to affect him in ways he never imagined possible. The morning after the charity event, the Empire Grand Hotel was relatively quiet, though the pace of work was as frenetic as ever. However, for Lana, there was something different in the atmosphere. The exhaustion from the previous night had been absorbed by a sense of accomplishment. She knew she had done her best. Besides, Ethan's words, brief though they were, still echoed in her mind. He had praised her, a direct and genuine compliment, even if it was brief and discreet. He, who seemed so impenetrable and critical, had acknowledged her work. She could still visualize the moment, and Ethan's image lingered in her mind longer than she'd like to admit. As she entered the hotel for her shift, Lana passed by the reception desk with an automatic smile for her colleagues and headed straight for the lobby, adjusting her uniform. However, upon arriving in the lobby, something unusual caught her attention. Near the elevator leading to the management offices, Ethan stood talking with an older man with an austere expression and familiar features. Lana immediately recognized him. It was none other than Robert Grand, the CEO of the group and Ethan's father. She had only seen him once or twice, always in formal, distant settings. Robert was known as an indefatigable businessman, with a reputation for expecting nothing less than perfection from everyone around him, especially his own son. Lana hesitated, knowing she shouldn't linger there, but something about Ethan's posture made her freeze. His shoulders were tense, one hand in his pocket, and the other holding a folder of documents. Even from a distance, it was clear a discussion was taking place, though they kept their voices low and discreet. But what impressed her was the look on Ethan's face. His usual coldness had given way to an expression of discomfort, maybe even frustration, which he seemed to be trying to control. Robert Grand, on the other hand, kept a sharp gaze and his lips tightly pressed, radiating an authority that seemed to weigh on Ethan almost oppressively. "You should have handled this better, Ethan." "Yes, the event was a success, but there were mistakes that shouldn't have happened," Robert said, his voice firm and low, dripping with disdain. "A good manager anticipates problems before they arise." Ethan nodded, visibly irritated but keeping his composure. "There were a series of unforeseen issues. I resolved them quickly, and the guests left satisfied. The amount raised was much higher than our initial projection. Isn't that enough?" Robert gave a dry laugh, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "Enough? Ethan, I expect more than enough from a grand. Do you think there aren't people watching, waiting for a single slip-up? We're at the top, Ethan, and the top has no room for mistakes." The tension in the air thickened, and Ethan lowered his gaze for a moment, absorbing his father's criticisms. Lana couldn't take her eyes off the scene. Each word from Robert Grand seemed to strike Ethan in a way he wouldn't let anyone else see. For the first time, she realized the depth of the pressure he carried. His father's criticism was as harsh as a final judgment, as if there were no room for mistakes or a second chance. Robert Grand clearly expected perfection, and more than that, he seemed unwilling to accept anything that strayed from his expectations. "If you keep justifying each mistake as an unforeseen issue, then perhaps it's time to consider whether you're truly ready to take over this company," Robert concluded, his tone now laced with reproach that bordered on contempt. Ethan's face hardened. Lana could see that he was struggling to keep calm, but his clenched jaw and fist at his side betrayed the frustration he was trying to mask. "I'll make sure these unforeseen issues don't happen again," Ethan replied, his voice controlled but tinged with bitterness he was clearly trying to hide. Robert Grand merely nodded, turning toward the elevator without even saying goodbye, leaving Ethan alone in the corridor. When his father walked away, Ethan seemed to relax slightly, as if an invisible weight had momentarily lifted. He took a deep breath, and Lana saw that, no matter how hard he tried to maintain the facade of a secure, unyielding man in that instant, he was just his son desperately trying to meet the impossible expectations of a demanding father. It was a side of Ethan no one else seemed to see. Lana discreetly moved away, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Her perception of Ethan began to change at that moment. Throughout her days working alongside him, Lana had thought of him as cold, rigid, and even cruel, someone who constantly maintained a superior and insensitive demeanor. But what she had just seen suggested that he, like anyone else, suffered under the weight of meeting others' expectations, in his case, impossibly high expectations. The day went on, and Lana tried to forget the scene she had witnessed, but Robert Grand's harsh words echoed in her mind, along with the image of Ethan's face as he was reprimanded. She wondered what it must be like to live under the weight of so many demands, where even a success like the previous night's event was seen as a failure by the person who mattered most to him. She felt an unexpected empathy that led her to see Ethan from a new perspective. Perhaps the stern image he projected to the world was, in fact, a shield against his own vulnerability, a way to hide the scars left by his father's constant criticism. Later that day, Lana saw him in the lobby, checking some operational details. There was something different in his expression, a pensive, distant look that contrasted with his usual demeanor. He seemed oblivious to his surroundings, moving almost mechanically, lacking the vigilant, controlled aura he usually exuded. Lana watched him from a distance, now with a mix of curiosity and compassion. On impulse, she decided to approach him. Perhaps it was the right moment to show that, despite their differences, she saw something beyond the cold mask he wore. When she got close, she noticed he was still so absorbed in his own thoughts that he hadn't noticed her approach. "Mr. Grand, I wanted to say that last night's event was amazing. The donations exceeded expectations, and many guests commented on how satisfied they were with the service," Lana said, trying not to sound overly gentle but offering a sincere compliment. Ethan looked at her as if he had just come out of a trance. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, perhaps even relief, though he tried to quickly mask it. He kept his face impassive, but Lana noticed that his posture softened slightly. "Thank you, Lana. I know you worked hard to help keep things under control," he replied, his tone less rigid than usual. "And I noticed that." She nodded but hesitated before continuing. She was about to take a step that, to many, might seem risky. "I know it's none of my business, but I saw you talking with your father earlier. I imagine it must be hard to work under such immense pressure." Ethan looked at her intently, surprised by her observation. For a moment, she feared she had gone too far, crossed a line. But instead of reprimanding her, he simply looked away, seeming to reflect on what she'd said. She waited in silence, respecting whatever space he needed to respond or simply end the conversation right there. "What you saw was," he began, before hesitating. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, a rarity for him, who usually had a sharp reply ready. "Well, it's what's expected of an heir. And being an heir means learning to ignore certain things." Lana sensed he was trying to be honest, though he remained cautious. She felt he was trying to open up a bit, but wasn't used to expressing such vulnerabilities. She knew this was a rare opportunity to see beyond the armor he'd built over the years. "It must be complicated," she said softly. "To always be expected to be the best, to never make mistakes." Ethan looked away again, as if the simplicity of her words were a blow he was trying to avoid. He knew she looked at him with compassion, but it wasn't something he was used to. "Complicated is a mild way to put it, Miss Brooks. But thank you for your concern. I appreciate it." The vulnerability in his response surprised Lana. It was the first time he acknowledged something beyond the perfection he always displayed. And she began to understand that Ethan Grand, behind that imposing and unshakable facade, was someone carrying burdens few could imagine. For the first time, she saw him not as a strict and distant boss, but as someone who also needed to be seen and understood. And as he walked away, Lana knew that, somehow, that small glimpse had changed something between them. The Empire Grand's lobby was bustling that afternoon. An international convention had brought a large number of guests, filling the hotel with people from all over the world representing influential companies from different sectors. Lana and the other receptionists were extremely busy, handling the demands of new check-ins, requests for information, and additional service requests from guests who seemed to expect more and more from the Empire Grand and its tireless team. Lana, as always, maintained a warm smile and a calm demeanor, even amidst the chaos. She had grown accustomed to days like this, where her attention and patience were put to the test. To her, each interaction with a guest was an opportunity to show that the Empire Grand was not just a luxurious hotel, but a place where people felt genuinely welcomed. However, that day had something in store that she could not have predicted. Amid the flow of executives and business people, a tall, well-dressed man approached the reception desk with firm steps. He exuded an almost aggressive authority, which Lana immediately noticed from the impatient expression on his face. She recognized him right away. It was Charles Hensley, one of the directors of a multinational that had booked several suites at the hotel for the convention. His cold, fixed gaze soon turned to Lana, who straightened her posture, preparing to serve him with her usual courtesy. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hensley. How may I assist you today?" she asked in her usual pleasant tone. Charles Hensley, however, seemed uninterested in her politeness. His expression was irritated, and he quickly began speaking in a firm tone, bordering on rudeness. "Good afternoon? Good afternoon? Yes, I hope it is for you, but it's anything but good for me. I'm having issues with my reservation, as always, and I'm seriously beginning to question the quality of this hotel," he said loudly, attracting glances from other guests around them. Lana maintained her smile and composure, trying not to be affected by Hensley's harsh tone. She knew that in her role, it was essential to be patient and provide support, especially for demanding guests like him. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Hensley. I can check your reservation and ensure everything is in order. If there was an error, Please know we'll do everything possible to correct it immediately." She began typing into the system to access his reservation details, but Hensley seemed increasingly irritated by the situation. As she typed, he crossed his arms and let out an ironic laugh, making sure to keep his gaze fixed on her. Of course. It's always the same, isn't it? We'll do our best. We apologize for the inconvenience. The same repetitive excuses. I don't need apologies, miss. I need efficiency, something that seems to be lacking here." Lana took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand, Mr. Hensley. Thank you for your patience, and I assure you we'll resolve this quickly." She knew that in situations like this, maintaining professionalism was crucial. However, Hensley seemed determined to extend the humiliation. He leaned over the counter, moving closer to her, his voice lowering but taking on an even more threatening tone. "I think you don't understand, miss. I'm not here to listen to your rehearsed kindness. I'm here to be treated with the respect a client of this level deserves, something clearly missing here." There was a chilling coldness in his voice, and Lana felt the weight of his words, though she remained firm. She tried to think of the best way to diffuse the situation and resolve it, but it was clear that nothing she said seemed to be enough for Hensley. Before Lana could respond, an unexpected presence approached. She noticed Ethan Grand beside her, exuding a quiet authority that immediately captured Hensley's attention. Ethan had observed part of the interaction, and upon seeing the guest's disrespectful behavior, decided to intervene without hesitation. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Hensley?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but with a firmness that was impossible to ignore. Hensley turned, surprised by Ethan's presence. He clearly hadn't expected someone from higher management to appear. Recognizing Ethan, Hensley hesitated for a moment, but his pride prevented him from backing down. Instead, he straightened his posture, attempting to keep his tone confident. "Yes, Mr. Grand. In fact, I'm having an issue with my reservation. This hotel is proving unable to meet my expectations, and the service here leaves much to be desired," Hensley said, subtly pointing toward Lana in an attempt to place the blame on her. Ethan raised an eyebrow, unfazed by Hensley's accusatory tone. He looked briefly at Lana, noticing that she had remained calm and professional, as always, even in the face of the guest's unacceptable behavior. His expression was one of complete control, but there was a glint of irritation in his eyes that only Lana could detect. "From what I can see, my employee is treating you with utmost courtesy, something this hotel values and promotes," Ethan said, keeping his gaze fixed on Hensley. "However, I'm sure we can find a solution to your dissatisfaction without resorting to inappropriate behavior." Hensley's reaction was immediate. He frowned, clearly surprised that Ethan hadn't automatically assumed a submissive position toward him. Instead, Ethan was defending Lana, and it disarmed him. Lana, for her part, felt a wave of surprise and gratitude, realizing that Ethan was taking her side. It was something she hadn't expected, especially from someone like him, who always maintained a distant stance with the staff. Hensley seemed to weigh Ethan's words for a moment before finally conceding, albeit reluctantly. "Well, I just expected service worthy of this hotel's name. I'm sure I can count on your team to resolve the issue," he said in a more restrained tone, though still filled with irritation. "Certainly," Ethan replied with a slight nod. "And I'll make sure your stay continues smoothly, as long as our mutual respect is maintained." With one last glance at Lana, Hensley nodded, clearly uncomfortable, and walked away, muttering something to himself. As he disappeared into the lobby, Ethan turned to Lana, his usually cold eyes softened by a glimmer she had never seen before. For a few seconds, she didn't know what to say. It was a new sensation to see Ethan intervene like that, especially in her defense. He could have simply ignored the incident or even sided with the guest, but instead, he had stood up for her, making it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any form of disrespectful behavior. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, looking at her with a serious yet genuinely concerned expression. Lana, still surprised, nodded quickly, trying to catch her breath and process what had just happened. "Yes, sir. I'm fine." "Thank you," she said, sincerely grateful. Ethan observed her for a moment, seeming to reflect on something. He gave a slight nod, keeping his gaze steady on her. "Good work, Lana. Not everyone can maintain their composure in front of someone like Hensley." "You were admirable," he said, his voice carrying genuine sincerity. His words hit her in an unexpected way. Knowing that Ethan was truly aware of what was happening around him, and that he recognized her effort, touched something deep inside her. It was as if, for a moment, all the coldness and rigidity he carried had been set aside, revealing an Ethan she hadn't yet known. They stood in silence for a few seconds, a silence loaded with meaning. She realized he was looking at her in a way she had never seen before. It wasn't just the evaluation of a superior, but a look of genuine acknowledgement, from someone who saw value in the person in front of him. Lana felt her heart beat faster, surprised by the intensity of the moment. Finally, Ethan broke the silence, resuming his serious demeanor. "If you need anything, let me know. And keep up the good work," he said before giving her a slight nod and walking away, returning to his duties. Lana remained standing, watching him walk away, trying to process everything that had just happened. For the first time, she had seen a protective side in Ethan, a part of him willing to stand up for someone else, even if it meant confronting an important client. It stirred something within her in a way she hadn't anticipated. As she returned to her work, she still felt a mix of emotions. Part of her continued to see Ethan as the demanding, distant boss, but another part, a part growing stronger, began to see him in a new light. She was beginning to realize that behind that rigid exterior was someone with values, someone who perhaps shared a sense of justice she never would have imagined in him. That night, as she prepared to sleep, Lana was still thinking about the scene in the lobby, Ethan's words, and the way he had looked at her. In her thoughts, the memories replayed, and a new understanding of him grew within her, increasingly intense and undeniable. She knew something was changing between them, and perhaps, in a quiet and unexpected way, that change had already happened. The Empire Grand was experiencing one of its most tumultuous days in recent months. An intense storm had swept over New York since early morning, and as the wind and rain battered the city, problems began to emerge. Many guests who had planned to leave for important commitments ended up returning to the hotel due to flight and transportation cancellations, bringing an unexpected influx of movement and demands. The lobby bustled with frustrated guests trying to reschedule reservations or arrange transport. To make matters worse, a failure in the hotel's internal systems caused delays in room service deliveries, heightening complaints even further. Lana was at the reception desk in the midst of the chaos, remaining calm as usual. She spoke to irritated guests, soothing them with patience and a steady smile, while her colleagues handled other emergencies of the day. Despite the intense pressure, she maintained her composure, ensuring each guest received attention and support, even amid difficulties. Around her, the other receptionists were doing their best to keep everything under control, but the stress was evident on their faces. During a brief moment of relative calm, Lana received an urgent message informing her that Ethan was supervising the upper floors and had summoned the reception team to provide updates on each guest affected by the storm and the system failures. Lana knew that even on regular days, Ethan was demanding, but given the current situation, he would certainly be paying closer attention to every detail. She gathered some documents and headed to the elevator to meet Ethan on the executive floor, where the hotel kept offices and meeting rooms. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped in and, glancing to the side, noticed that Ethan was already there, adjusting his suit sleeve, his gaze fixed on the panel. He looked exhausted, but no less determined, and gave Lana a quick nod, acknowledging her presence. She felt a slight tension building around them, but maintained a professional posture, positioning herself beside him as the doors closed. The elevator began to ascend, but before reaching the desired floor, it jolted abruptly and stopped, the lights flickering briefly before plunging the space into dimness. Lana looked around, surprised and slightly alarmed. She pressed the buttons on the panel several times, but nothing happened. The elevator seemed completely stalled. They were trapped. Ethan let out a heavy sigh, staring at the panel as if trying to make sense of what had happened. He picked up the emergency phone embedded in the elevator wall and attempted to call security, but received no response. Apparently, the storm had caused a power failure in the hotel, leaving them without communication. "It looks like we're stuck," Ethan murmured, with little surprise in his voice, as though he had expected one more thing to go wrong that day. He leaned back against the elevator wall, looking at Lana with an expression of resignation. Lana gave an awkward smile, attempting to ease the tension. "I guess this was all we needed, wasn't it?" She tried to laugh, but the sound came out a bit nervous. "It seems so," Ethan replied dryly, without taking his gaze off her. The feeling of discomfort grew between them, but at the same time, Lana felt that this moment was unexpectedly revealing. There, confined in the elevator, Ethan seemed less the rigid boss and more human. He looked tired, his facial features softened, and for the first time since she'd known him, she sensed that he was, in fact, defenseless. The silence stretched, and Lana, in an attempt to distract herself and, perhaps, to get to know this man who intrigued her so much, decided to start a conversation. "You know, it must be hard to keep everything under control, especially on a day like today. I think I'd lose my mind with so much pressure." He let out a low chuckle, something she hadn't expected. "I think I'm past the point of losing my mind. After a while, you get used to living with the pressure," he said, slightly pensive. "Or at least you learn to pretend you can handle it." She observed him closely. There was a hint of melancholy in his words, something that made her want to know more about him. Ethan had always treated her with a mix of formality and distance, but in that moment, she felt that he might be willing to share a bit of himself. "Pretend?" Lana asked cautiously. "I thought people like you, I don't know, were always in control of everything." Ethan sighed, looking at the elevator panel as if it held answers to questions he hadn't even dared to ask. "It's not quite like that," he replied, without taking his eyes off the panel. "Growing up with the grand name brings many things. From early on, I knew my life would be dedicated to what that name represents, to what the company expects of me. I learned to wear a mask of control because I can't make mistakes. I can't be weak." Lana listened attentively, feeling almost embarrassed to be there, intruding on such personal territory. Still, she understood what he was trying to say. There was far more to Ethan than she had imagined, and he seemed to carry a crushing pressure on his shoulders. "So you never had a choice," she said softly, reflecting on the weight of those words. Ethan nodded, looking down at the floor. "Never. Since I can remember, everything was planned, programmed. My schools, my friends, the people I was supposed to know, everything. The idea of choice was never a part of my life." Lana felt a pang in her chest as she listened. She didn't know what it was like to live under so much pressure, to have a destiny laid out before you even understood what it meant. She thought of her own life, the choices she had made, the struggles and challenges she'd faced, all of which were her choices, decisions she had made for herself. The prospect of a life without autonomy, where everything was controlled by expectations, seemed unbearable to her. "It must be hard. Always having to be perfect," she commented carefully. "And always being in control, without ever really being able to relax." Ethan laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, a sound of resignation. "Perfection isn't an option for me. It's an obligation." He looked her in the eyes, and Lana saw something vulnerable there, something he hid from the world. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to live without this weight. To do something just because I want to, not because it's expected of me." She realized that beneath that layer of rigidity, there was a person who longed for something more. A part of Ethan that wanted to break free, that craved a bit of freedom. And for a moment, she felt a connection with him, as if that vulnerability brought her closer to something she never imagined she'd find in him. "Everyone has expectations of us," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But I think some of those expectations are worth it, while others just drag us down. Maybe if you gave yourself a chance to escape some of those expectations, you'd find something that makes you happy." He looked at her in silence for a few seconds, as if processing every word. Something in what she said made him think, something he perhaps had never considered. "Maybe you're right," he replied after a while. "But it's hard to break away from something that's been built around you from the start. It's like I'm trapped in these invisible walls. A legacy that, while it gives me a purpose, also deprives me of something essential." She wanted to say something that might offer comfort or perhaps hope. But seeing his closed expression, she knew he wasn't expecting words of consolation. Perhaps he didn't even know how to handle them, having never received any. Silence fell over them again, but this time it was a silence of understanding, as if they had shared something profound without needing words. Lana felt there was something there, something in Ethan that went beyond the facade of power and perfection. He was human, after all, full of flaws and uncertainties he hid so well. Finally, the elevator lights flickered and the system resumed functioning. They felt a slight jolt, and the elevator began moving again. Ethan straightened his suit, slowly returning to his usual posture, as if that brief moment of vulnerability had to be locked away again. When the doors opened, he made a move to step out but turned to Lana before crossing the threshold. "Thank you for listening, Lana," he said, without the usual formality in his tone. And with a slight nod, he walked away, leaving her alone in the elevator, still processing everything that had happened. Lana knew that after that moment, she would never look at Ethan the same way again. There was something in his story, in his words, that had deeply moved her, something she understood in an inexplicable way. After the incident in the elevator, Ethan tried to resume his routine as usual. He immersed himself in meetings, reports, and the hundreds of daily tasks his role demanded, throwing himself into work with even greater intensity, as if determined to drive away any distracting thoughts. But despite his efforts, he couldn't get Lana out of his mind. The memory of their conversation in the elevator, her gentle words, and the understanding he saw in her eyes haunted him. She had listened to him and no one else had before. That brief exchange had exposed parts of himself that he usually kept hidden, and it disturbed him more than he was willing to admit. Lana, on the other hand, also felt confused. The way Ethan had opened up to her had changed something between them, making it impossible to see him as just the strict, distant boss. She now perceived a depth in him, a sensitive and complex side that contrasted with the impenetrable image he worked so hard to maintain. And as she tried to deal with these new and unexpected feelings, she noticed that Ethan also seemed different. In the days that followed, Lana noticed small changes in his behavior, details that made her question what was really happening. Before, Ethan barely noticed her, limiting interactions to what was necessary for work and nothing more. But now he seemed to pay attention to things that had never mattered to him before. He asked subtle questions, some even trivial, but they held a special weight. Questions that made her feel observed, as if he were trying to understand an invisible puzzle that only he could see. One morning, while Lana was at the reception desk reviewing the guest registry, she noticed Ethan approaching. He stopped beside the counter, his gaze casually focused on her, causing her to shiver slightly. She looked up, trying to hide her discomfort, and gave him a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Grand," she said, maintaining her usual formal tone. "Good morning, Lana," he replied, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel that this good morning carried more than just simple formality. For a few seconds, he remained silent, as if deciding what to say next. Finally, he tilted his head slightly, observing her with a look that mixed curiosity and a kind of intensity she couldn't decipher. "I heard you're from Texas, right?" he asked casually, though for Lana, The question seemed to carry unusual significance. She nodded, somewhat surprised that he was interested in something so personal. "Yes, sir. I grew up in a small town there. I moved to New York a few years ago to seek new opportunities." Ethan nodded, his gaze still fixed on her. It must have been quite a change. New York isn't easy for newcomers. Did you have trouble adjusting? Lana hesitated for a moment, intrigued. This kind of conversation was so unexpected that she wasn't sure how to respond. He had never shown any interest in her past or who she was outside of work. Why now? Yes, it was. A bit scary at first, she admitted, smiling slightly. But I always wanted to experience something different, so it was worth it. New York is challenging, but I like the pace and the opportunities I find here. He watched her, his eyes almost gentle, as if trying to grasp the essence of what she was saying. She felt unsettled, as if he were seeing beyond her words, trying to understand something deeper about her. She tried to ignore the growing nervousness and refocused on the papers in front of her, attempting to concentrate. But that wasn't the only moment he showed interest in trivial details of her life. A few hours later, while she was checking the main hall to ensure everything was in order for the arrival of an important group of guests, she again felt Ethan's presence beside her. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, quickly looking up. He paused, glancing around as if he were just following along with what she was doing. "You always seem to be attentive to every detail," he commented, almost in an approving tone. "That's rare." She smiled, trying to ignore the nervousness his compliment stirred. "I like doing my job well. I think deep down, everyone wants to feel like they belong somewhere, you know?" He nodded, his expression serious, but his eyes showed a faint glimmer of understanding. "Yes, that makes sense." He looked at her intensely for a moment. "And how do you feel about your place here?" Lana blinked, surprised by the question. She would never have expected such a personal curiosity from him. It was as if, suddenly, Ethan were trying to understand what made her who she was. She took a deep breath, feeling slightly uncomfortable, but also intrigued. "I feel good here. It's a place that's challenged me from day one, but I think challenges also bring growth," she said, trying not to reveal too much about how much her work meant to her. Ethan regarded her as if considering her words, but he said nothing. He simply gave a slight nod before moving away again, leaving Lana immersed in a mix of confused emotions. In the following days, these unexpected encounters and small conversations continued. Ethan seemed to appear at random moments, as if he were finding excuses to interact with her. He asked about seemingly insignificant things, like her music preferences or what she did on her days off. These were trivial questions, but for Lana, these interactions carried weight she couldn't ignore. She found herself growing anxious whenever he was around, questioning the true intentions behind each word. This attentive and curious Ethan seemed so different from the distant, work-focused Ethan. At the same time, she wondered what it all meant. Was he genuinely interested in her? Or was this just a test, a way to observe her reaction and measure her loyalty to the job? These doubts haunted her more and more, leaving her in a constant state of vigilance and perhaps even anticipation. She tried to convince herself that there was nothing to it, that he was just a boss interested in getting to know his employees better. But there was something in Ethan's eyes, in his presence, that went beyond a professional relationship. One quiet afternoon, as she was reviewing some reservations at the reception, Ethan appeared again, unannounced, positioning himself beside her. This time, he seemed more relaxed, as if he genuinely wanted to talk. "Lana, you like New York, but do you miss Texas?" he asked, catching her by surprise once more with the intimate tone of the question. She hesitated for a moment, surprised by the familiarity with which he spoke. "Yes, sometimes I miss the calm, the starry sky," she said, her voice dropping slightly, almost as if sharing a secret. He nodded, as if sharing that sentiment. "Sometimes New York feels too intense, don't you think?" She looked at him, intrigued. She hadn't imagined that he, a man who ran one of the city's largest conglomerates, could feel something similar. The intensity of New York was what he had always seemed to desire. But now, observing Ethan's slightly lost expression, she wondered if there was more to him than he let on. The feeling of closeness between them grew, in a way that was almost frightening to Lana. She felt an unexpected connection with him, something that made her want to know him beyond the facade of boss and businessman. But at the same time, there was an uncertainty, a fear of what it all really meant. She tried to convince herself that it was all in her imagination, that Ethan was just being cordial, but each time she saw him, her heart raced. And he, despite his efforts to hide it, seemed to share the same restlessness. His eyes followed her when she passed through the lobby, and he seemed to find excuses for conversations he would never have initiated days before. One evening, while Lana was reviewing reports in the reception office, she once again felt his presence beside her. He leaned in, looking at the computer screen as if he were interested in her work, but the closeness between them was undeniable. She could smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his presence. "This report needs to be revised," he said, pointing out an insignificant detail. She looked at him, trying to hide her nervousness. "I'll take care of it now, sir." He nodded but didn't step back. His eyes remained fixed on hers, and she could feel the weight of that gaze. It was as if he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She stood paralyzed for a moment until he finally pulled away, muttering something incomprehensible before leaving. When he was gone, Lana realized her hand was trembling slightly. That closeness, the glances, the indirect words, all of it left her in a state of constant confusion. Something was growing between them, something she couldn't control. It was a quiet night at the Empire Grand, with much less guest activity than the bustling days of conventions and events the hotel usually hosted. Lana was finishing her shift, preparing to review the last records of the day, a task she enjoyed doing alone. In silence, with only the subtle hum of the air conditioner filling the atmosphere. There was something comforting about the hotel at that hour. The empty corridors, the softly dimmed lights, and the peacefulness created an almost magical ambiance. As Lana walked towards the reception office, ready to close out the night, she heard a muffled sound coming from one of the meeting rooms on the upper floors. Initially, she thought it might be a security staff member or perhaps a lost guest, but as she got closer, the sound became clearer. It was a conversation or perhaps an argument. She recognized Ethan's voice, though muffled by the heavy door, and another older male voice answering him in a severe tone. Driven by curiosity and an odd feeling, Lana hesitated by the door. Even though she knew it was wrong to eavesdrop on a private conversation, she felt unable to walk away. The voice of the other man, whom she quickly identified as Robert Grand, Ethan's father, was firm and controlled, but held an almost cruel tone that made her shiver. "Do you realize how many times you've failed to uphold the standard this name demands, Ethan?" Robert's voice was cutting, cold as a sharpened blade. "With each passing day, I see you drifting further from the future I envision for this company. Your conduct, your stance, even your focus seems divided." Lana felt a tightness in her chest hearing those words. She had imagined what it might be like to live under such rigid expectations, but hearing Robert speak to his son this way felt almost suffocating. She stayed still, knowing she shouldn't be there, but unable to ignore what she was hearing. "My focus isn't divided, Father," Ethan replied firmly, though there was a slight tremor in his voice, betraying the tension he was trying to control. "I'm trying to find ways to innovate, to take grand enterprises beyond mere tradition. But you refuse to accept that the world is changing. I need space to do things my way." Robert let out a cold, almost cruel laugh. "Your way? Ethan, you don't have a way. You have what I built for you. Everything here is my creation, and it will only continue to prosper as long as you understand and accept that. If you're willing to risk the family name, perhaps you don't deserve what I've prepared for you." Those words hung heavily in the air, and Lana could imagine how much they must have hurt Ethan. For a brief moment, she felt tempted to walk away, to let him deal with that moment alone. But something within her, perhaps, a growing sense of loyalty or a desire to support the vulnerable side of Ethan she had come to know, prevented her from leaving. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, and she noticed that while Ethan tried to defend his perspective, Robert remained inflexible, treating his son's words as mere rebellious attempts. When the sound of footsteps echoed from the other side of the door, Lana quickly backed away, hiding behind one of the hallway columns, and watched as Robert Grand exited the room with a cold, indifferent expression. He barely noticed her presence as he passed by, his gaze distant and face impassive. As soon as Robert disappeared down the corridor, Lana turned back to the meeting room door, hesitating for a moment before deciding to approach. She wasn't entirely sure what she would say or if Ethan wanted to talk to anyone after such a conversation, but she felt she couldn't just leave him there alone. She knocked lightly on the door, her heart pounding. "Come in," Ethan's voice sounded dry, heavy with exhaustion. Lana opened the door slowly, watching him carefully. Ethan was seated at the meeting table, his head tilted down and hands resting on the table in a posture that seemed to mix frustration and resignation. His face showed an expression she had never seen before, a blend of weariness, disappointment, and something deeper, something almost indefinable. When he noticed it was her, a slight surprise flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by a neutral expression. He straightened, attempting to put on his usual professional facade, though she could see the lingering pain in his gaze, the marks left by his father's harsh words. "Lana," he said, his voice slightly tense, "I didn't know you were still here." She took a hesitant step into the room, closing the door behind her and watching him with care. "I was finishing some tasks and ended up overhearing part of the conversation," she said, her voice honest. "I know it wasn't my place, but I couldn't help hearing. I'm sorry if I invaded your privacy." Ethan remained silent for a few seconds, taking in her words. To her relief, he didn't seem angry. Instead, she noticed that his expression softened slightly, as if somehow he was relieved she was there. "Don't worry," he replied, his voice lower, almost a whisper. "I think, deep down, it's good that someone knows." Lana felt a pang of sadness for him. Ethan, the man who was always so controlled and unreachable, seemed for the first time exposed. She took a step closer, careful not to invade his space, but wanting him to know she was there for him. "I don't know everything you carry, Ethan," she said softly but firmly, "but I know you're giving your best. Anyone can see that." He looked at her, his eyes revealing a glimmer of gratitude and surprise. It was as though he were hearing those words for the first time, as if no one had ever recognized the effort he put into every detail, every decision. "My father doesn't see it that way," Ethan murmured, averting his gaze as if trying to avoid the weight of his own truth. "To him, it's as though everything I do is insufficient. Since I was a child, I knew that nothing less than perfection would be acceptable, and yet he always believes I could do more, be more." Lana felt a tightness in her chest. His voice, although he tried to keep it neutral, betrayed a pain she understood on some level. She knew what it was like to live under expectations, though hers were entirely different from Ethan's. Still, the desire to be accepted, to prove one's worth, was a universal feeling. "Maybe he's afraid of losing control," Lana suggested, her tone gentle but with a depth that made Ethan look at her again. "Maybe he clings to the past because he thinks it's the only way to secure the future." Ethan let out a soft sigh, shaking his head. "Maybe you're right, but it doesn't make it any easier." Lana nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. "No, it doesn't," she agreed, her voice filled with empathy. "But you're not alone. I think you have more people on your side than you realize." He looked at her, the intensity of his gaze piercing through any barriers he tried to maintain. For the first time, she felt that he saw her fully, without the layers of formality and rigidity. There was a hint of vulnerability there, something that made her want to be even closer to him, to offer more than just words of support. She sensed he was opening up, that he trusted her in a way he perhaps had never trusted anyone. "Thank you, Lana," he said, with a sincerity she had never heard in his voice before. "I sometimes forget that I can rely on someone. I think for so long I've learned to handle everything on my own that it's hard to remember there are people willing to listen." She smiled softly, feeling an indescribable connection with him. "I think we all need someone to truly listen to us. And you have me, Ethan, if you ever need." Ethan looked up, surprised by the simplicity and sincerity of her offer. It was something he had never expected to hear, a declaration of support that caught him off guard and at the same time brought him a sense of peace. For a few seconds, silence enveloped them, but it was a silence full of meaning. Lana felt that something deep and genuine had been established between them, a trust that went beyond words and the roles they played at the hotel. She knew that from that moment on, whatever he needed, she would be there. When they finally parted, there was something different in the air, something more intimate and sincere. She knew that after that moment, nothing between them would ever be the same. A few weeks after the night she shared that unexpected moment with Ethan, Lana was called to the HR office at the Empire Grand. Although she didn't know exactly why, she had a vague suspicion that it might be something significant. She had heard rumors about a restructuring in the staff lineup, but she had never imagined that her name might be under consideration. Yes, Lana was dedicated, but the Empire Grand was always a competitive place, full of highly experienced professionals, making any promotion seem distant, almost unattainable. Sitting in the office waiting room, she tried to stay calm. Her hands rested in her lap, but her fingers were tightly intertwined, reflecting the anxiety she was trying to hide. When she was finally called in, she stood up, took a deep breath, and entered. The HR manager greeted her with a warm smile, inviting her to sit down. "Lana, thank you for coming so promptly," began the manager in a welcoming tone. "Well, I won't prolong the suspense. I'm pleased to inform you that you have been promoted to the position of reception coordinator. From now on, you'll be directly responsible for managing guest services and coordinating the rest of the reception team." For a moment, Lana was speechless, as if the words needed a little extra time to sink in. A wave of surprise and joy washed over her, and her heart raced. She was finally achieving something that, for her, was a true accomplishment. She had worked tirelessly, dedicating herself day after day to stand out, and this recognition was proof that her efforts hadn't been in vain. "Wow, I don't know what to say. Thank you. This means so much to me," Lana said, her voice full of gratitude and emotion. "I promise I'll do my best to honor this position." The manager smiled, satisfied. "I know you will, Lana. We've been monitoring your performance for some time, and you've shown not only technical skills, but also an attitude that reflects the values of the Empire Grand. MR Grand also recognized your work and approved your promotion." The mention of Ethan made Lana's cheeks flush slightly. Their relationship had changed since that last encounter, and she noticed that he had started to treat her with a newfound consideration, a spark of respect that hadn't existed before. And now, knowing he was involved in the decision to promote her only intensified the sense of responsibility she felt. With a light heart and a smile that seemed impossible to wipe off, Lana returned to the lobby where she discreetly shared the news with a few close colleagues. Her friends enthusiastically congratulated her, and she felt the genuine joy they expressed for her achievement. The environment at the Empire Grand had always been competitive, but Lana had earned the respect and friendship of those who worked with her. However, she quickly realized that with the new position came new responsibilities and challenges. Before, Lana had been used to following guidelines and meeting reception demands. Now, though, she was the one coordinating the team, deciding how to distribute tasks, setting the standard for service, and above all, facing difficulties directly with Ethan. As a coordinator, she no longer only answered to managers, but frequently reported directly to Ethan, who always demanded the highest standards of efficiency and quality. It didn't take Lana long to realize that working so closely with Ethan brought out a completely different dynamic. In the first few days after her promotion, everything seemed to go smoothly. She dedicated herself fully, improving processes and developing strategies to enhance service. However, over time, small disagreements began to arise, escalating subtly but consistently. Ethan seemed to want to control every detail of what was happening in reception, something she now felt responsible for managing herself in her new role. Although they both shared mutual respect, neither was willing to easily concede. One morning, while Lana was organizing the shift schedule, Ethan approached the counter, watching her with that meticulous look she knew so well. He held a service evaluation report, with notes she recognized as his small red marks suggesting changes to details she already considered well organized. She sighed inwardly, preparing herself for a conversation she knew could become challenging. "Lana, I noticed a few points in the recent service reports," he began, his tone firm and direct. "I think we can improve how the team handles last-minute requests. I have some suggestions I'd like you to implement." Lana nodded, keeping her calm, though a hint of frustration emerged. Since taking on the coordination role, she had tried to implement her own methods, aiming to create a dynamic she believed would be more efficient. However, Ethan continued to intervene, making her feel that her autonomy was limited. "I understand, Mr. Grand, and I appreciate the suggestions," she said carefully. "But if I may, I think some of the recent changes I implemented are starting to show results. Maybe it's just a matter of giving the team a little more time to adapt to the new system." Ethan raised an eyebrow, appearing slightly surprised by her response, but maintaining a neutral expression. "Time is something we can't afford to waste, Lana. Efficiency needs to be immediate. I want you to consider these suggestions as priorities and make the necessary adjustments to the team as soon as possible." She took a deep breath, containing her irritation. She knew he had an extremely demanding view of everything involving the hotel, but his inflexible stance sometimes made her feel that her ideas were never valued enough. "I understand, sir, but if the team doesn't have space to adjust, it could compromise the quality of service," she retorted, keeping her tone professional but with a slight firmness. "I believe that, with a bit more patience, the results will be better and more consistent." For a moment, Ethan's gaze shifted. He observed her with an intensity that made it clear he noticed the disagreement. It was as if he were trying to understand whether Lana truly believed in what she was saying or if she was simply defending her position. However, instead of insisting, he surprised her by giving a slight nod, a gesture of consent. "All right, Lana, I'll trust your judgment for now," he said, his tone slightly softer but still firm. "But know that I'm watching closely." Lana nodded, feeling both relieved and tense. She knew that Ethan respected her for standing by her decisions, but the pressure of being under constant supervision was intense. In the weeks that followed, these minor disagreements continued to arise as if they were in a silent tug of war. Although they respected each other, Ethan's dominant stance and her desire for autonomy generated a tension that seemed to grow each day. One busy afternoon, when the hotel was packed due to a conference, a particularly delicate situation tested their professional relationship even more. A VIP guest had arrived earlier than expected and demanded a series of special accommodations, causing a flurry of activity at the reception. Lana rushed to resolve the issue, directing her team to shift some reservations and prepare the requested room as quickly as possible. However, Ethan arrived shortly after, inspecting the situation with a keen and clearly disapproving eye. He pulled her aside, his expression serious, his voice low but charged with an authority that left no room for questioning. "Lana, we need to be proactive, not reactive. The reservation change should have been anticipated before he arrived. This can't happen again." Lana felt irritation rise within her. She knew he was right about the importance of anticipating problems, but the way he spoke, without acknowledging the work she and her team had done to resolve the situation, frustrated her deeply. "I understand your concern, Mr. Grand, but I did the best I could with the resources we had," she replied, keeping her tone calm, but with a firmness that made it clear she wouldn't back down easily. "And we managed to resolve the situation quickly." Ethan watched her, seeming to analyze every word and gesture. For a moment, he looked like he was about to insist, but then something in his expression softened. Perhaps he was recognizing that, despite their differences, Lana was doing her best, and somehow he needed to trust that. "Very well, Lana," he said, with a slight hesitation, as if those words were difficult for him. "I acknowledge your team's effort, but stay vigilant." When he walked away, Lana felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Working alongside Ethan was a constant challenge, a balancing act between maintaining her autonomy and dealing with his relentless expectations. However, as much as these situations caused conflict, she felt that something deeper grew with each small battle. Ethan respected her in a way she had never imagined, and although it was difficult, there was a sense of camaraderie and understanding that permeated every confrontation. She knew the road wouldn't be easy, but she felt that together, they were building something solid, even amid constant clashes and tensions. The business trip to the Empire Grand Unit in Los Angeles had been scheduled for weeks, and Lana knew it would be a significant test of her newly promoted skills. She would be traveling with Ethan and some other team members to review hotel operations, implement improvements, and hold meetings with local investors. For Lana, it was an invaluable opportunity to prove her worth. Yet she also knew that spending so much time alongside Ethan, away from the familiar setting of New York, might intensify tensions and further challenge the fragile dynamic between them. Upon arriving at the airport, it was clear that the trip wouldn't be entirely smooth. The flight had mild turbulence, and the cabin was full, limiting any privacy. Lana, trying to focus on the reports she'd brought along, couldn't help but occasionally glance at Ethan, who sat beside her, reviewing his own documents with his usual concentration. Every time he adjusted his glasses or ran his hand through his hair, Lana's heart quickened slightly, feeling the forced proximity imposed by the flight. Ethan, for his part, was quieter and more distant than usual, as if he too was aware of the weight of sharing such a confined space. When they landed in Los Angeles, the team was taken directly to the hotel. The Empire Grand Unit there was stunning, with contemporary architecture contrasting with the classic style of New York, but still reflecting the same luxurious, impeccable standards of the brand. After dropping off their luggage in their rooms, the two headed straight to a meeting with the local manager and several executives. The main focus was to discuss service restructuring and strategies for improving guest experiences, and Lana knew Ethan wanted her to play an active role in these discussions. She was excited, but also felt the pressure of being beside him, being evaluated with every comment and suggestion she made. Throughout the meetings, Ethan watched every word Lana said closely without intervening. At times he made discreet notes, but he remained serious and introspective, as if absorbing more than just the content of the discussions. Lana, although nervous, stayed confident. She presented detailed proposals and defended ideas firmly, noticing that with each of her contributions, Ethan's eyes seemed to sparkle slightly, as if pleased to see her excel. When they finally left the meeting room, Lana felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Los Angeles sky with shades of orange and purple. The team decided to wrap up the day with a casual dinner at the hotel's restaurant, but Ethan, who seemed particularly reflective, suggested that Lana join him for a quick review of the topics discussed before they joined the others. She agreed, although something in her intuition told her this moment might be more than just a work review. As they walked through the hotel garden, where a grand fountain reflected the day's last light, Ethan finally broke the silence. "You were excellent today, Lana," he said, looking at the horizon with his hands in his pockets. "Confident, direct. That's exactly what I hoped for when I supported your promotion. Lana felt her face warm. It was rare to hear such a direct compliment from him, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Thank you, Mr. Grand. I'm glad to know I met your expectations, she replied with a reserved smile. He turned his gaze to her, and something in his expression was less formal, closer, as if the barrier of boss and employee was slowly dissolving. I think we're past the Mr. Grand stage, he said with a slight smile. I think here in Los Angeles, we can relax a bit on the formalities, don't you? She laughed, surprised by his comment. What was meant to be a business trip seemed to be taking on a different tone, and that closeness was affecting her more than she cared to admit. All right, Ethan, she responded, testing his first name on her lips. It felt a bit strange at first, but also natural, almost intimate. But I'll need to get used to it. It still sounds odd to call you by your first name. He smiled again, and they continued walking side by side through the garden, the calm and welcoming atmosphere contrasting with the fast pace of New York. For a few minutes, the silence between them was comfortable, as if the usual tension had been softened by California's mild climate. When they reached a patio overlooking the city, Ethan stopped, looking out at the distant lights. You know, Lana, sometimes I wonder what made me follow my father's expectations so rigorously, he said, almost in a whisper, as if speaking to himself. Lana turned to him, surprised by his sudden vulnerability. Ethan rarely mentioned family pressure in conversation, but here, under the Los Angeles sky, he seemed more willing to reveal something personal. Maybe it's because you want to honor his legacy? She ventured softly. He shook his head thoughtfully. Yes, that's part of it, certainly. But sometimes, I wonder if it's more than that, if maybe I've lost myself in the process, setting aside everything that could have been important to me. Lana felt the weight of his words. It was as if he was bearing a part of himself he had always kept hidden. And for the first time, she understood that behind that facade of authority and self-control was a person with insecurities and doubts. Someone questioning the direction their life had taken. A surge of courage pushed her to speak. I think you've been remarkable, Ethan, she said, sincerely. Even with all the pressure, everything your father demands of you, I see someone who's dedicated, someone who cares. And maybe that's what makes you special. He looked at her, and something in his gaze softened. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something, but the words remained stuck. Instead, he nodded slightly, as if absorbing what she had said. That night, after dinner with the team, Lana felt that same energy in the air. The physical closeness of Los Angeles seemed to make Ethan's presence even more palpable, more intense. And he seemed to feel the same. As they headed to their respective rooms, the silence between them was filled with a tension that was both uncomfortable and alluring. When they reached the hallway where their rooms were located, both hesitated, as if on the verge of saying something that lingered on the tip of their tongues, but that neither dared to express. Lana, he began, his voice low. I know our relationship has been complicated, but I want you to know that since you joined the team, something has changed for the better. She felt her heart race, and the weight of his words seemed to pierce through the formal boundaries that had always existed between them. I feel the same way, Ethan. I feel like I've learned so much since we started working together. For a moment, he took a step towards her but paused, as if pulled back by rationality, aware of the consequences of any action beyond that thin line separating them. She held her breath, conscious of the proximity and the intense look he cast her way, a gaze that seemed to convey everything the words hadn't yet revealed. Ethan sighed, averting his eyes, and gave a faint smile, one that seemed to mix resignation with a restrained desire. Get some rest, Lana. Tomorrow we have another full day. Lana nodded, trying to hide her disappointment mingled with understanding. Of course. Good night, Ethan. He walked away, heading to his room, but before entering, he looked back one last time, and the look he gave her was unmistakable. Something had changed between them, something they could no longer ignore. The business trip to Los Angeles was nearing its end, and the Empire Grand team decided to host a small gathering in the hotel lounge to unwind after a week of intense meetings and visits with local investors. It was a warm, easygoing night, and the lounge, adorned with soft lights and background music, offered a spectacular view of the Los Angeles skyline, twinkling like a carpet of stars on the hillside below. The team enjoyed the evening, laughing and sharing stories, a welcome contrast to the usually strict and focused corporate environment. Lana felt relaxed and happy, sipping a glass of wine while chatting with a few colleagues. Ethan was there too, but he kept a slight distance, observing everything with his usual discretion. After all, he was the boss and accustomed to not fully participating in social activities. Even so, the relaxed atmosphere and the satisfaction of seeing his team at ease left him more at peace than usual. From a distance, his gaze frequently drifted toward Lana, who seemed to shine in this more relaxed setting. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her hair cascading over her shoulders, and her smile lit up her face. She was the same Lana he knew in daily routines. Yet there was something different about her that evening, a glow he hadn't noticed before. While Ethan watched, he saw one of the team members approach Lana and strike up an animated conversation. It was Liam, a recently hired manager responsible for overseeing the performance of Empire Grand's West Coast branches. Liam was young, confident, and by all appearances, quite charming. Ethan noticed Lana laughing openly with him, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as they talked, as if sharing a private joke. He continued to watch, trying to ignore the growing discomfort he felt, but it was impossible not to notice the way Liam leaned toward Lana, his easygoing tone matched by her effortless laughter. A strange feeling began to stir within Ethan, something he couldn't immediately name. Every time Lana smiled or laughed with Liam, something inside him tightened, a growing unease he tried in vain to rationalize. He looked away, attempting to focus on something else, but his attention kept returning to the two of them, as if drawn by an involuntary pull. Ethan found himself annoyed by how comfortable and relaxed Liam seemed around her, as if she was accessible and close to anyone who wanted to approach. The truth, which he hardly dared to admit, was that the idea of Lana smiling that way for someone else deeply unsettled him. Ethan stood up discreetly and grabbed a glass of whiskey at the lounge bar. He took a sip, the liquid burning slightly as it went down, but the discomfort didn't ease. His gaze continued to shift toward Lana and Liam, and each exchanged glance between them seemed to intensify his irritation. Seeing Lana so close to another man frustrated him deeply, as though he himself was being excluded from an invisible circle he wasn't allowed to enter. It was a new feeling, uncomfortable and intense. Lana, for her part, didn't seem to notice Ethan's gaze. She was absorbed in her conversation with Liam, who made her laugh and share stories about her travels and professional experiences. Liam was friendly and attentive, and the time flew by as they chatted and drank together. The lighthearted and relaxed atmosphere made her momentarily forget about the pressures of work and the complexities of her relationship with Ethan. After a while, Ethan could no longer contain his frustration. Feeling the weight of that inexplicable unease, he approached the group, adopting his usual serious and controlled expression, which immediately caught the attention of Lana and everyone around. "I hope everyone is enjoying the evening," he said with a slight smile that came off more formal than friendly. His gaze fixed on Lana briefly before he quickly shifted it to Liam, giving him a look Lana noticed as subtly appraising. "Liam, how are you finding the environment at Empire Grand? I know you're still new to the team." Liam seemed a bit surprised by Ethan's direct question, but smiled amiably and answered, seemingly unaware of the slight tension in Ethan's posture. "I'm really enjoying the team, Grand. Especially here on the West Coast. We have exciting projects and great people," Liam replied, flashing a smile at Lana. Ethan remained impassive, but Lana noticed the slight tension in his jaw. For a moment, she was confused, but then something made her suspect what was happening. She knew Ethan well enough to notice the small shifts in his mood he tried to hide, and his discomfort didn't seem merely professional. What she didn't realize, however, was that every smile and every kind gesture she shared with Liam was causing a reaction in Ethan that he didn't know how to manage. He wanted to convince himself it was merely a matter of concern for how employees interacted and for maintaining the team's professional demeanor. But deep down, he knew it was much more than that. The jealousy he had never experienced before was undeniably present, leaving him restless and frustrated with himself. The very notion that he, Ethan Grand, could feel jealous about seeing Lana talk with another man was a disturbing thought, and he felt weak and unsteady because of it. Lana noticed Ethan's stiff posture and, in a natural gesture, took a step toward him as if trying to break the invisible barrier that seemed to be forming between them. "Ethan, would you like to join us?" she asked with a friendly smile. "We're talking about the differences between New York and California." Liam was sharing stories from his travels along the West Coast. Ethan hesitated for a moment, studying her face before responding. "Actually, I just came to get a drink," he lied, pausing deliberately. "But I hope you're all enjoying yourselves." Lana nodded, feeling a bit disconcerted by his response. His tone was polite, but his formality clashed with the relaxed atmosphere. She sensed he was uncomfortable but couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Ethan, for his part, turned to walk away, but the feeling of leaving Lana there, laughing with Liam, was almost unbearable. With every step, the discomfort grew until he stopped, turned back, and decided he couldn't leave things as they were. He approached Lana, asking her to step aside to a quieter corner of the lounge where they could talk without interruption. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, though his gaze was intense enough for Lana to know there was something important behind it. Lana felt her heart speed up. "Of course, Ethan." Once they were at a safe distance from the others, Ethan took a deep breath, trying to maintain the calm he valued so highly. However, as he looked at her, all the frustration and confusion came to the surface, and he realized he couldn't pretend he wasn't affected. "Lana, you and—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You seem quite close to Liam." Lana blinked, surprised by his observation. "He's new to the team, Ethan. We were just talking about work and the differences between branches." "Why?" She tilted her head, looking at him attentively and slightly intrigued, as if trying to read his thoughts. Ethan looked away for a moment, feeling vulnerable in a way he despised. He realized that his serious expression had failed to conceal what he was really feeling, and it only added to his frustration. "It's nothing," he murmured, though it was clear there was something. "It just seemed like you two were quite at ease." Lana felt a spark of understanding. Was he jealous? The idea was both surprising and flattering. She had never imagined him as someone who would be affected by feelings like that, especially toward her. But his intense gaze, the way he struggled to keep his composure, all indicated that this was exactly what was happening. She took a step closer, close enough for him to notice the softness in her voice. "Ethan, we're just colleagues," she said with a gentle smile, hoping to dispel the tension. "There's nothing special there, if that's what you're thinking." He looked at her, and the tension seemed to dissolve, replaced by a relief he tried to hide. The silence between them was loaded with meaning, and Lana felt his proximity like a wave, an energy that seemed to wrap around the two of them in a tangible way. She knew he was fighting something, struggling to control himself, but this moment seemed to reveal that he was, after all, just as human as anyone else. Without saying another word, Ethan nodded, trying to regain his composure, but she could see that his gaze held an intensity he could no longer conceal. Back in New York after the Los Angeles trip, Lana was determined to refocus on her work. The intense meetings, long days, and time spent with Ethan had stirred a blend of emotions and thoughts she preferred to keep, locked away in a safe corner of her mind. Ever since that moment in the lounge, when she'd noticed the jealousy in Ethan's eyes, She couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that he felt something more for her. But the thought was confusing, and to Lana, a little frightening. Mixing emotions with work, especially with someone like Ethan, seemed like a risky recipe. She tried to immerse herself in the new responsibilities her promotion required, focusing on the details and the pressure of managing the reception and meeting Ethan's expectations. Yet every time he was around, his presence seemed to fill the space in an almost magnetic way. It was as though an invisible, tense line connected them. Whenever they crossed paths in the lobby or meetings, she felt her heart race and her cheeks flush involuntarily. Try as she might to ignore it, his gaze on her left her flustered, and the tension seemed to build with every shared glance. Ethan, with his controlled demeanor, didn't give anything away, but Lana had the distinct impression that he too was battling something. Days later, while organizing reports at the reception desk, Lana received an unexpected message from Ethan, inviting her to dinner that evening. The invitation was brief, almost casual, but it sent a flutter of nerves through her. Part of her wanted to decline, wary of what it might mean to meet him outside of work. Yet another part, the part fed by growing curiosity and attraction, couldn't resist. At 8 in the evening, Lana arrived at the upscale restaurant where Ethan awaited her. The place was elegant and softly lit, with impeccably set tables and an intimate ambiance, ideal for conversations that could extend beyond the professional. Ethan was already there, greeting her with a slight smile. He appeared relaxed, but Lana noticed a blend of anticipation and apprehension in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out her chair. "Of course, Ethan. I thought it might be good for us to talk outside of work," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady and casual despite her nerves. The dinner began lightly, with small talk about work, the pace at Empire Grand, and moments from the Los Angeles trip. But soon the conversation deepened, and as it progressed, Ethan began sharing more personal thoughts, opening up about the pressures of always meeting his father's expectations and the burden of upholding the family empire. Lana listened intently, feeling increasingly connected to him. Every word revealed another facet of his personality, and she realized how complex and, at the same time, vulnerable he was. At one point, after a sip of wine, Ethan looked at her with an intensity that seemed to carry an unspoken confession. "Sometimes I wonder if all of this is worth it," he said in a low, almost whispered voice. "All this dedication, all this effort to maintain an image that my father envisioned, that the company expects." Lana felt her heart ache. It was rare to see Ethan so open, and she knew it wasn't just the professional expectations weighing on him, but also a constant search for something he couldn't quite define. "Have you ever thought about following a different path? Something you truly want, without worrying about what others think?" she asked gently. Ethan seemed to ponder her words, but there was a shadow in his gaze. "It's hard. When you grow up being told you have to be perfect, any personal desire feels like a weakness, something that doesn't belong to who you're supposed to be." His response sounded like the echo of something he'd carried for a long time. Lana realized he wasn't just talking about the weight of the grand name. He was talking about himself, about the struggle to deal with feelings and desires he perhaps had never expressed. For a moment, she felt an impulse to reach for his hand, to show him he wasn't alone, but she held back. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn when Ethan, trying to shift to a lighter tone, commented on how her dedication to work often made her neglect her own needs. "And what about you, Lana? I think you should get out of your rigid routine a bit and allow yourself to live more," he said, in a tone that sounded almost like a veiled critique. Lana was surprised by his observation, and although she knew he didn't mean it badly, his words stung slightly. "I don't think you know me that well, Ethan," she replied with a smile that masked her annoyance. "What you see at work is only one part of who I am. I chose to be where I am, and that's important to me." Ethan leaned in a bit, his gaze fixed on her, and his tone became more challenging. "And what else have you chosen, Lana? It seems like you live for work. always focused on pleasing and doing what's expected. His words surprised her, and she felt a surge of indignation. Just because you live under your father's expectations doesn't mean everyone else does. I have my own goals, Ethan, and I'm not here just to please others. He frowned, and the atmosphere between them shifted dramatically. I know you're dedicated, Lana, but sometimes it's hard to watch you lose yourself to work. It's as if you're always trying to prove something. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. And what do you think I'm trying to prove? She challenged. Maybe you're judging things from your own insecurities. Ethan narrowed his eyes, and his expression turned cold. So that's what you think, that I'm insecure? Lana realized she had touched a sensitive nerve, but she held her ground. Maybe you're so focused on image, on meeting expectations, that you don't even realize you're sacrificing what you truly want. He was silent for a moment, her words resonating in the air like an uncomfortable echo. The truth was, Lana had touched a raw nerve, and Ethan felt vulnerable and attacked at the same time. You don't understand, Lana, he said tensely. Things aren't that simple for me. I can't just ignore everything that was built to get to where I am. I understand that, Ethan, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. I just think you're trapped in something that keeps you from seeing that there's more to life than meeting others' expectations. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan looked at her, and Lana saw the conflict in his eyes, as if he were battling against something he wanted but feared. His face, usually so controlled and self-assured, now showed a mixture of anger and sadness she'd never seen before. Finally, he looked away, his expression subdued. Maybe this was a bad idea, Lana. I'm sorry if I wasted your time. Lana felt a pang in her chest at those words, but kept her composure. It wasn't a waste of time, Ethan. I just think you should stop fighting so hard against what you feel. Ethan seemed to absorb her words, though his face remained impassive. He signaled for the waiter, requesting the check, and the rest of the dinner unfolded in uncomfortable silence. They avoided each other's gaze, and Lana felt a wave of sadness realizing that, despite the strong connection between them, the walls Ethan had built around himself were difficult to breach. At the end, Ethan escorted Lana outside the restaurant, where a light drizzle had begun to fall. They exchanged one last look, both bearing the weight of what had been a failed attempt at closeness. Thank you for coming, Lana, he said, his voice cool, though tinged with regret. Good night, Ethan, she replied, sensing that this moment, though tense and painful, had been necessary to reveal just how complex and fragile their connection truly was. As he walked away, disappearing into the drizzle, Lana stood there alone, her heart heavy with the unfulfilled desire to break down the barriers Ethan had built between them. The morning after her dinner with Ethan, Lana struggled to focus on work, but the tense atmosphere of the previous night still lingered in her mind. She tried to concentrate on the day's tasks, answering emails and organizing upcoming reservations, yet Ethan's words and the way the evening had ended continued to echo, leaving her with a mix of anger and sadness. She couldn't shake the feeling that their professional relationship and the delicate personal connection they were beginning to form had only grown more complicated. While she was lost in thought, an unexpected call brought a fresh wave of concern. It was her younger sister, Emily, who lived in a small town in rural Texas. Emily's voice was tense and hesitant, as if she had wrestled with her pride before deciding to call. Lana, I'm sorry to bother you at work, but I really needed to talk, Emily began, her tone laced with anxiety. Lana immediately pushed thoughts of the dinner aside, focusing on the worry in her sister's voice. Is everything okay? Lana asked, a sense of dread settling in. Though the sisters were close, Emily rarely called during work hours, which clearly signaled something serious. After a brief silence, Emily took a deep breath before explaining. I'm in trouble, Lana. Financial trouble. Things have been really tough these last few months. Rent's gone up and expenses keep piling on. I just don't know what else to do. Her confession caught Lana off guard. Emily had always been as independent and proud as Lana, and this call showed just how challenging her situation must be. Lana felt an immediate urge to help, yet she hesitated, knowing her own financial situation was tight. She had savings, yes, but covering her own needs while helping Emily significantly wouldn't be easy. "Don't worry, Emily," Lana said in a soothing voice, trying to ease her sister's tension. "We'll figure it out, okay? I'll do whatever I can. I'm not sure how yet, but I'll find a way." Emily murmured her gratitude, and the sisters talked for a few more minutes, with Lana reassuring her that she wouldn't face this alone. When the call ended, Lana stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of it all. She knew she'd need to find a way to help, even if that meant cutting her own expenses and reevaluating every unnecessary cost. Over the next few days, Lana worked on adjusting her finances to send money to her sister, but the pressure was mounting, especially with her workload increasing. She didn't want to ask anyone for help, least of all Ethan, given the recent tension between them. But managing the situation alone was proving more challenging than she had expected. Balancing the books wasn't easy, and she was starting to feel the strain. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed the change in Lana's demeanor. Though she continued to perform with her usual efficiency and dedication, he sensed a difference in her, a quiet exhaustion, a subtle restlessness. In their brief exchanges around the lobby or during work discussions, he picked up on a tension in her expression that was uncharacteristic of her. He felt compelled to ask, but held back, wary of rekindling the friction from their dinner and preferring to keep a respectful distance until the tension faded. Then one busy afternoon, as Lana was taking a call at the front desk, Ethan happened to pass by and overheard part of the conversation. She was speaking with her sister again, and though her voice was low and steady, the concern was unmistakable. "Emily, please don't worry. I'll handle it. I just need a few more days, okay? We'll figure it out, I promise." Ethan frowned, curious about the context. He rarely listened to others' conversations, but something about this one piqued his interest and concern. He sensed there was more going on in Lana's life, something she clearly wasn't sharing. True to his nature, Ethan didn't let the matter go. That evening, he asked his assistant to discreetly gather some information about Lana's family situation, something he normally wouldn't do. But in this case, it felt necessary. Before long, he had the details. Lana's younger sister, Emily, was facing financial difficulties. Her living expenses had risen, and she was struggling to keep up on her own. With this knowledge, Ethan felt an unexpected urge to help. Lana's pride and resistance to asking for support were traits he understood and admired. Yet he also knew that insistence on independence could sometimes make things harder. He considered how best to approach the situation without making her feel invaded or patronized. The last thing he wanted was to stir up more conflict or reopen old wounds. The next day, he approached Lana at the reception desk in a casual manner. He greeted her as usual with a polite nod, and she returned a professional smile, though she seemed a bit distracted. "Lana, could we have a quick chat in my office?" he asked, keeping his tone professional but with a touch of warmth. She nodded, surprised by the invitation, and followed him. Once they were in the office, Ethan closed the door and gestured for her to sit. There was something different in his expression, a gentle look that made her feel more at ease, though she remained cautious. He sat across from her, pausing for a moment as if carefully choosing his words. "I understand your sister is going through some financial troubles, Lana," he began, his voice low and calm, though tinged with genuine concern. Lana's eyes widened, surprised by his direct mention of the situation she'd tried to keep private. Her cheeks flushed as the discomfort of having her personal struggles exposed washed over her. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Ethan, I didn't want you to know about this," she murmured, her pride evident in her tone. "It's something I'm trying to handle on my own, and I know I can. I don't want to mix my personal issues with work." Ethan nodded, understanding her reluctance, but decided to press on, believing that his offer of help could be more beneficial than any argument. "I understand you want to handle this on your own, and I respect that, Lana," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I'm here because I want to offer my help. I don't want you to go through this alone if there's an easier way." She looked away, feeling both relieved and uneasy. There was a blend of gratitude and discomfort in her heart. On one hand, Ethan's offer was generous and would provide an immediate solution to Emily's troubles. On the other, accepting his help meant lowering her guard, acknowledging that she might need him more than she wanted to admit. "I appreciate it, Ethan, truly," she said, returning her gaze to him, her eyes hesitant but grateful. "But I'm worried about what this could mean. Accepting your help might make it seem like I'm relying on you, like I can't handle my own problems." Ethan sighed, understanding her internal struggle. He knew that her pride came from the same place as his own, a need to show she could manage challenges on her own, to maintain a strong and unshakable front. But in this case, he could see past it. He saw someone who needed support, even if she wasn't quite ready to accept it. "Lana, I understand how you feel, maybe more than you realize." He looked at her intently, and there was undeniable sincerity in his gaze. "But sometimes, accepting help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. I don't want to intrude on your personal life, but I don't want to see you carrying everything alone when there's a way to ease the load." She was silent, his words echoing in her mind. The idea that accepting help could be a sign of wisdom rather than weakness was something she hadn't considered before. For the first time, she felt that Ethan wasn't just her boss, but someone who genuinely cared, who saw beyond her job duties and responsibilities. "If I accept, will it change anything between us?" she asked cautiously, fearing that accepting his help might create a new dynamic, perhaps even a debt she didn't want to owe. Ethan gave her a slight smile, his intense gaze softened by a hint of understanding. "It won't change anything. What I'm offering is simply help with no strings attached. You have my support, Lana, and nothing more." She thought it over for a moment, the weight of her decision clear in her expression. Finally, with a small sigh, she nodded, accepting his gesture of generosity, though still holding onto her pride. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll accept the help, but I hope to repay you someday." He nodded, respecting her wishes, and for the first time, a comfortable silence settled between them. There was something mutual in that exchange, an unspoken understanding that they had both set aside a bit of their pride and built a bridge across their barriers. As Lana left his office, she felt a lightness in her heart, though she knew Ethan's help meant more than just financial support. It was the beginning of a mutual trust that went beyond work, perhaps even a sign that both were ready to explore something deeper. A few weeks after accepting Ethan's help to support her sister, Lana felt that things were finally beginning to stabilize. With the temporary financial assistance, Emily had managed to organize her expenses and avoided the risk of losing her apartment. Lana continued to send money when she could, remaining vigilant to ensure her sister wouldn't have to worry about her situation any longer. Although she still felt somewhat uncomfortable accepting Ethan's help, part of her recognized the relief his generosity had brought. However, one day, while reviewing Emily's accounts, Lana noticed something strange. Checking the bank statements her sister had sent, she saw a substantial deposit that she hadn't made, far beyond the modest amounts she'd been able to contribute. Emily had mentioned offhandedly that someone had unexpectedly helped her with a significant sum, but she hadn't been able to specify exactly where it came from. Lana felt a twinge of suspicion that quickly solidified. Ethan had done more than just offer help to her. He had involved himself directly in Emily's situation. At first, Lana was shocked, almost unable to believe he'd gone so far. It wasn't a small gesture, and the fact that he had done it without telling her showed a level of involvement she hadn't expected. But as the initial surprise wore off, discomfort settled in. Generous as his actions were, the sense that Ethan had crossed a boundary bothered her. It felt as though he'd taken on a responsibility that wasn't his, as if he wanted to intervene in something she should have handled herself. Determined to confront him, Lana waited until the end of the workday. When she saw him leaving his office, she quickly approached, calling his name with a steady voice. "Ethan, I need to talk to you," she said, trying to keep her emotions in check as her thoughts raced. He stopped, observing her closely, and the look on her face made it clear that this would not be an easy conversation. He nodded, indicating that she follow him into an empty meeting room. Once inside, Lana closed the door and took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I know you helped my sister beyond what we agreed," she began, looking at him directly. "And while I appreciate the gesture, Ethan, this wasn't something you should have done without discussing it with me first." Ethan watched her silently for a moment, his intense gaze absorbing her words. He wasn't surprised. He knew this conversation would come, and deep down, he may have even been waiting for it. "I understand that you may feel uncomfortable, Lana," he said, his tone calm but sincere. "But I did what I felt was necessary to ensure your sister's safety. I didn't want to see you burden yourself more than you already were." She crossed her arms, trying to contain the frustration building inside her. "I know your intentions were good, but you crossed a line, Ethan. I accepted your help, yes, but that doesn't mean I want or need you to fix my family's problems." He frowned slightly, considering her words. There was something in his expression that showed he understood the weight of what she was saying, but at the same time, a quiet determination that, to him, the gesture meant more than just a question of boundaries. "Lana, I never wanted to take away your autonomy," he began, glancing momentarily toward the window as though searching for something beyond it. "But sometimes, helping someone isn't about solving problems. It's about preventing things from getting worse. I know what it's like to feel as though everything rests on your shoulders, that you have to be strong all the time. Maybe, in a way I hadn't planned, I just wanted you to feel a bit of relief." Lana was silent, taking in his words. There was a vulnerability in his tone that she hadn't expected, a sincerity that showed he wasn't trying to control the situation, but rather alleviate a burden he seemed to know all too well. "Ethan, you know I don't like depending on others, especially when it comes to my family," she murmured, her voice softening slightly. "I don't know what this is, but the last thing I want is to feel indebted to you." He nodded, understanding her reluctance, yet there was something in his eyes that carried a deeper weight, a story he had perhaps kept hidden for a long time. "Lana, my family was never what one would call a model of support," he began, his voice low and tinged with a suppressed emotion. "I grew up in a household where dependence was viewed as weakness. Any support I received always came with a list of conditions, with expectations imposed on me before I even knew what that meant." She watched his face, noticing the seriousness in his expression and the pain he tried to conceal. She knew Ethan had a strained relationship with his father, but she hadn't realized he carried such deep-seated family scars. The way he spoke showed that the weight of his past was far from something he had left behind. "So when I see someone who works so hard to stay independent, to avoid depending on anyone, I see a reflection of who I became. But I'm starting to wonder if that's more of a prison than a virtue," he continued, his eyes fixed on her. "I grew up thinking I couldn't trust anyone, that I had to carry everything on my own. And seeing you do the same makes me wonder if that's really a burden we should hold on to." Lana felt a pang in her heart. For the first time, she understood the depth of Ethan's gesture. He wasn't simply trying to solve Emily's problem. He was trying to show that it was possible to trust, that there were people willing to help without imposing conditions. His fear of depending on others, the pride they both shared, these were things that kept them in a constant struggle for control and independence. "I didn't know it was like that for you, Ethan," she said gently, her voice now full of empathy. "I imagine it couldn't have been easy, growing up where everything had to be perfect." He gave a slight, sad smile, one tinged with resignation. "It wasn't. To my father, success was synonymous with absolute control. And any weakness, well, he made sure I knew there was no room for that." She felt an instinctual urge to reach for his hand, to show him she was there, but she held back. She knew he wasn't accustomed to displays of affection, that he had built a barrier around himself to protect from the world and from the emotions he saw as threats. "Ethan, you don't have to follow the same path he did. Neither you nor I have to carry the world on our shoulders alone," she murmured, her voice steady but kind. "I never thought you'd understand this kind of burden, but now I see you might understand it even better than I do." He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, she felt that barrier between them begin to dissolve. The silence between them was heavy with understanding, as though they had finally shared a truth that brought them closer in a new way. She saw a vulnerability in his eyes she hadn't imagined, and somehow it made her realize that beneath the facade of the strict boss, Ethan was just someone who, like her, wrestled with his own fears and insecurities. "You know, Lana," he said quietly, a gentleness in his voice, "sometimes I think this independence we value so much is actually a way of protecting ourselves from getting hurt. It's easier to be strong alone than to trust and risk being let down." She nodded, silently agreeing with every word. For the first time, she felt that Ethan saw her fully, that he understood what she had always feared to admit, that her need to be independent was in fact armor, a way to shield herself from trusting too much and eventually being left behind or hurt. "I think maybe I've never really trusted anyone. Not like this, not truly," she admitted, her voice touched with a melancholy smile. "I've always thought that if I only relied on myself, I'd never feel vulnerable. But now I realize that it's kept me from truly connecting with anyone." Ethan watched her in silence, and she sensed the weight of unspoken words, the deep understanding that now bound them in a way beyond work, beyond formalities. There was a shared understanding now, an unspoken bond that both were finally willing to acknowledge. "Maybe it's time we learn to trust together," he said, his gaze steady yet filled with tenderness. "I know it won't be easy for either of us, but I think it's worth a try." Lana felt her eyes mist up slightly, but she smiled, accepting that unspoken pact. It wasn't just a conversation about help or independence. It was an acknowledgement that at last, they were ready to lower the walls that kept them isolated from the world and from each other. When they left that room, they knew that something profound had shifted between them. In the days following her conversation with Ethan, Lana felt swept up in a whirlwind of emotions. Each time she thought about what he had shared about his family, the loneliness, and the pressure of always having to be strong, she felt an unexpected closeness, a connection that transcended their professional relationship and stirred feelings she had never imagined having for him. It was a complex blend of admiration, empathy, and something deeper, something that made her question what she truly felt. But at the same time, the idea of getting involved with Ethan seemed risky, almost impossible. After all, he was her boss, and everything she had worked so hard to build could be jeopardized if she allowed herself to give in to these feelings that, until now, she had kept firmly under control. Yet the discomfort of not knowing how to handle the situation continued to grow. So she decided to confide in her best friend, Megan, someone who had always been her confidant and to whom she turned when she needed a clearer perspective on things. On a Saturday morning, they met at a cozy cafe in Brooklyn. The setting was quiet, with rustic decor and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee in the air, the perfect atmosphere for an intimate conversation. Megan, who was spirited and outspoken, immediately noticed the tension in Lana's face. "All right, Lana, I know that something is bugging me. Look, what's going on?" Megan asked, taking a sip of her latte, her eyes full of anticipation. Lana laughed, a bit nervously, trying to gather her thoughts. "Megan, I don't even know where to start, but I think I'm starting to feel something for someone at work. And it's not just anyone," she murmured, looking away, a little embarrassed. Megan raised her eyebrows, intrigued. Go on. Who's this someone?" "It's Ethan." "My boss," Lana admitted, lowering her voice, waiting for Megan to react dramatically as she usually did. And indeed, Megan didn't disappoint. Her eyes widened and she let out a long wow, placing her cup on the table and leaning in for every detail. Ethan Grand? The serious, mysterious boss? Lana, this is intense. But wait, are you interested in him? Like, romantically? She asked, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. Lana sighed, running a hand through her hair. I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's confusing. He's shown me a side of himself I never imagined, a more human, vulnerable side. And no matter how much I try not to think about it, I feel more and more connected to him. But I'm scared of where this could lead, Megan. He's my boss. It's complicated. Megan studied her carefully, as if trying to understand all the nuances of the situation. Complicated, yes, but it also sounds special. Lana, you've always been so independent, always kept things under control. Maybe he's bringing out something in you that you needed to discover. Lana reflected on her friend's words, trying to allow herself to feel what she had been avoiding for so long. It was true. Ethan stirred something different in her, something that made her want to know more about the person hidden behind those layers of formality and distance. But what if it only leads to complications? Lana asked, still hesitant. I fought so hard to earn my position at Empire Grand, and he has so many internal conflicts, so many family expectations. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Megan placed a hand over hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. Only you can decide what you're willing to face, Lana. But I also think maybe it's time for you to allow yourself. It seems like this Ethan is trying to let his guard down because of you, and you deserve to explore that without so much fear. The conversation with Megan left Lana feeling more confused, but also more open to exploring her feelings. On her way home, her thoughts kept returning to Ethan, and she began to accept that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face what she felt. Meanwhile, Ethan was experiencing his own whirlwind of emotions. Since the conversation with Lana about supporting her sister, he felt even closer to her, as though they had finally broken down the walls that stood between them. He admired her deeply, her determination, resilience, and the natural way she could touch those around her. After everything he had shared, he realized he could no longer ignore the feelings that had been quietly growing in his heart. A few days later, Ethan made a decision. He knew there were risks, that getting involved with Lana could bring complications, but something inside him said that, for her, it would be worth it. More than anything, he didn't want to keep pretending that nothing was happening. That evening, he invited Lana to join him at the hotel bar after work. It was an unusual request, and while Lana was surprised, she accepted, intrigued by his intentions. When she arrived at the bar, she found him waiting at a discreet table, where the elegant setting and soft lighting created an almost intimate atmosphere. She approached, and he stood to greet her with a slight smile, one filled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Thank you for coming, Lana," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Of course. I was curious about the invitation. Ethan, it's not often that you call me for a conversation outside of work," she replied, trying to stay calm, though her heart was racing. They began with casual conversation, but Lana could feel the tension in the air. She sensed there was something unspoken, an intensity in Ethan's gaze that indicated he was about to bring up something significant. Finally, when he leaned slightly closer, his expression more serious, she knew the moment had come. "Lana, he paused, as if searching for the right words. "Lately, something has changed between us, and I know you've felt it as much as I have. I don't want to keep pretending that this closeness, that what I feel, doesn't exist." She felt her breath catch for a second, but kept her gaze steady on his, trying to process what she was hearing. "Ethan," she began, unsure of how to respond. He raised a hand slightly, signaling her to let him continue. "I know it might seem confusing, perhaps even inconvenient, but I can't keep this to myself. Since we've gotten to know each other better, since you've started to trust me, I realize that I feel something more, something beyond work, beyond what I ever expected." Lana remained silent, taking in each word. her heart pounding harder than ever. She had imagined many times what it would be like to hear this from him, but the reality was far more overwhelming than she could have anticipated. "I don't know where this could lead," he continued, his eyes locked on hers, revealing a mix of desire and vulnerability. "But I know that, for the first time in a long time, I want something for myself. I want to try to understand what this is, what it could be. With you." Lana stayed silent, feeling a blend of happiness and fear that was hard to describe. Ethan's words touched something deep inside her, but the reality of the situation still left her apprehensive. "Ethan," she began cautiously, "I feel something for you too, but I can't ignore the complications. We work together, and I really value what I've built at Empire Grand. I'm afraid this could complicate everything." He nodded, as though he expected this response, but his expression remained resolute. "I understand, Lana, and I don't want you to sacrifice anything for this. I just needed to be honest with you. I don't want to keep pretending we can simply carry on as usual. You mean so much to me, and I think it's worth facing the complications." The silence between them was thick with a nearly tangible tension. Lana felt the weight of the decision, the intensity of the moment. She knew that from now on, they could no longer ignore what was between them, and for the first time, she was willing to accept the risks, to face whatever came. "Then, maybe we should give it a try," she said, with a faint smile that mixed courage and nervousness. "Slowly, see where this takes us." Ethan smiled, the relief and joy evident on his face, as though she had just given him the chance he'd been hoping for. "I wouldn't ask for anything more, Lana," he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. That night, they left the bar with a new connection, an understanding that went beyond words, and though it still held uncertainties, it carried the promise of something real. Starting a relationship with Ethan was a choice Lana had never imagined making, but after their conversation at the bar, it was clear that they were both willing to explore this connection, as complicated as it might be. They agreed, however, to keep it a secret, at least for the time being. The work environment at Empire Grand was strict, and a relationship between the director and a reception coordinator could spark suspicions and rumors neither of them wanted to face. In the days that followed, they both tried to carry on with their routines, hiding the newfound closeness and the unspoken understanding that now existed between them. Lana continued to focus on her work, maintaining her professional demeanor, but every glance exchanged with Ethan sent a thrill of both joy and nervousness through her. There was something magical about this new phase, the sensation of sharing a secret with him, knowing that behind discreet glances, there was something more, a connection that silently bound them together. Ethan, too, had begun to change. It wasn't intentional, but having Lana in his life made him lighter, more approachable, and even kinder. Previously, Ethan had been known as a reserved and demanding boss, someone who rarely showed warmth or patience. Now, however, he seemed more attentive to his employees, more willing to listen, and occasionally even showed signs of friendliness. In the hotel's corridors, some noticed his more relaxed demeanor, and although no one knew the reason, subtle rumors began circulating. During a management meeting, the first curious glances surfaced. Ethan was leading a discussion on upcoming hotel events, and Lana, who attended to discuss reception details, was seated a few spots away. Normally, he would keep a serious and straightforward tone, but that morning, he surprised everyone by smiling at one of Lana's suggestions, praising her approach and encouraging her to elaborate further. Colleagues exchanged discreet looks, as if this display of support was extraordinary coming from Ethan. Lana noticed the glances and felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her focus, forcing herself to ignore everyone's curiosity and concentrate on what Ethan was saying. At the end of the meeting, as she prepared to leave, one of her colleagues, Marissa, the sales manager, approached her with a curious smile. "Hey Lana, you've been working a lot with Ethan lately, haven't you? He seemed quite interested in your ideas today, don't you think?" Marissa commented, trying to mask her curiosity. Lana gave a restrained smile, aiming for a casual response. Yes, I think he appreciates when the team brings in fresh ideas. He's always been very focused on innovation, you know. Marissa raised an eyebrow but kept smiling, as if mulling over Lana's words. Sure, I just found it interesting. You know how private he usually is, but he seems more approachable lately. Lana only laughed lightly, trying to wrap up the subject smoothly. I guess he's adjusting to the team's new pace, that's all. The conversation with Marissa left Lana a bit unsettled. She knew it would be hard to keep everything under wraps for long. Empire Grand was a place where any change in Ethan's behavior rarely went unnoticed. And as days passed, it was clear that he was also becoming less cautious about hiding his more human and caring side. Once, as Lana was organizing some records at the reception desk, Ethan passed by her and in a discreet gesture, placed a light hand on her shoulder, a casual touch to most, but it made her heart race. It was such a small gesture that no one would suspect, but to Lana, it meant everything. These small moments between them intensified everything. There were glances that spoke more than words, hidden smiles, and brief touches unnoticed by most but precious to them. The duality of being lovers outside of work and professionals within it created a tension that left them both nervous yet even more connected. However, Ethan also felt the pressure mounting. Since he had taken charge of Grand Enterprises, he had maintained a steadfast posture as a leader. His relationships with employees were strictly professional and limited. But now, his closeness with Lana was becoming too obvious to those who knew him well. Thomas, one of the older directors, noticed the change and approached Ethan informally after a meeting. Ethan, just between us, you seem more relaxed lately, even, dare I say, approachable. Has something changed? Thomas asked with a knowing smile. Ethan let out a short laugh, trying to deflect the question. Nothing major, Thomas. Maybe I'm just trying to adopt a more open approach to better understand the team's morale. Thomas nodded, though his expression showed he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, whatever it is, it seems to be working. I just hope this lighter side doesn't mean you're losing the firm vision you've always had. Don't worry, Thomas. My priorities remain the same, Ethan replied seriously, but realized he would have to be more cautious going forward. Despite the comments, Ethan and Lana's relationship continued to grow, and each day, keeping everything a secret became more challenging. Work meetings demanded self-control, but whenever they were alone, they found solace in each other. One particularly exhausting night, after a long day of negotiations and meetings, Ethan asked Lana to meet him at a secluded cafe, far from the eyes of New York. As soon as she arrived, he stood to greet her, and finally, in a place where they didn't have to pretend, he embraced her. The hug was warm, as if they were reconnecting after days of tension. When they sat down, Ethan looked at her with a tired but content smile. It's not easy keeping up appearances, he joked, but there was a note of truth in his words. I feel like everyone around us is beginning to notice something. Marissa gave me a strange smile today. Lana laughed, understanding exactly what he meant. I don't know how much longer we can keep it hidden, Ethan. I think people are already starting to suspect. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe, but I don't want you to feel pressured, Lana. We can take all the time we need. She smiled, feeling his care in every word. I know, Ethan. It's just, it feels like we're living between two worlds, and sometimes it's hard to keep them separate. He took her hand over the table, a gesture that had always been discreet. But here, far from curious eyes, it felt natural. I understand, Lana, and I admit that part of me would like to give up this secrecy, to be with you openly. But at the same time, I know how much your position at Empire Grand means to you, how important all of this is. Lana nodded, understanding the dilemma. For her, working at Empire Grand was more than a position. It was the culmination of years of effort and sacrifice. But at the same time, Ethan's presence in her life had become indispensable, and the connection they shared went beyond any professional goal. "Maybe we just need to take it slow and see where it leads," she said, with an encouraging smile. "We don't have to have all the answers now. Let's just keep going as we are." Ethan nodded, silently agreeing. It was an unspoken pact, a choice to continue savoring these moments without the pressure of defining the immediate future. But as he looked at Lana, he knew that something deep and real was emerging, something they would eventually have to face without fear. After their meeting, they both returned to the hotel the next morning, more confident yet aware that curious glances and murmurs would only increase. And so, between work and stolen moments of intimacy, Ethan and Lana maintained a relationship that, although secret, was marked by an increasingly undeniable and real bond. The relationship between Ethan and Lana blossomed in secret, and with each passing day, their bond seemed to strengthen. They found discreet ways to spend time together, maintaining their professionalism at work, but savoring every moment alone to connect on a genuine and profound level. Both knew the risks, but more and more, they felt that what they shared was real, something worth preserving regardless of the consequences. However, that carefully guarded happiness didn't stay safe for long. One Friday afternoon, Ethan was summoned to his father's office. His relationship with Robert Grand, the CEO of Grand Enterprises, had always been marked by strict expectations and a cold formality. Ethan had grown up in the shadow of his father's ambitions, and with each conversation, each significant decision, Robert made it clear that Ethan could never stray from the path laid out for him. For Robert, personal emotions and business were incompatible, and any hint of weakness was treated as an unforgivable error. As Ethan entered his father's office, he felt a tension in the air. Robert sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his expression severe and unreadable. His posture suggested that something serious, perhaps even grave, was about to be discussed. Once Ethan sat, Robert observed him silently for a moment, his gaze as sharp as a blade, before finally speaking. "Ethan, I've heard that you've been distracted lately," Robert began, his tone low but laced with disapproval. "It seems your attention isn't fully on the business." Ethan felt his stomach tighten but kept his face impassive. He knew his father was a perceptive man, always aware of everything that happened around him. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Father. I've been focused on Empire Grand's operations and our expansion projects," Ethan replied, his tone steady but cautious. Robert gave a cold, calculated smile that only confirmed Ethan's suspicion that this wasn't just any conversation. "Let's get to the point then. I know you're involved with an employee. Lana Brooks, isn't that right?" Ethan felt his blood run cold. Despite all their precautions, somehow Robert had found out about his relationship with Lana. His father's unyielding gaze made it clear that he did not approve of such an involvement, especially with someone who, in his eyes, didn't belong to their world of power and influence. "Father, this is a personal matter, and it doesn't interfere with my performance or the business," Ethan said, trying to contain his rising anger. But Robert wasn't about to relent. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing as he fixed his eyes on his son. "Not interfere? Do you truly believe that, Ethan? A Grand entangled with someone who has no part in the world we've built? She's a needless distraction, a weakness you can't afford." Ethan clenched his jaw, struggling to contain the fury bubbling inside. He'd known his father would view his relationship with Lana as an affront, but the disdain with which Robert spoke about her unsettled him deeply. Lana wasn't a distraction. She was an incredible person who made him question his path, who opened his eyes to the world beyond ambition. "Lana isn't a weakness," Ethan said quietly, conviction filling his voice. "She's someone who... she means a great deal to me." Robert let out an exasperated sigh, as if Ethan's response was a personal disappointment. "Ethan, you're jeopardizing our family's legacy for a whim. And if you don't see the seriousness of this, let me make it clear. This relationship needs to end, and quickly." Ethan felt a mixture of anger and sorrow at his father's ultimatum. He knew Robert was ruthless, but the cold way he dismissed something so meaningful left him feeling misunderstood, trapped in a cycle of expectations he'd never asked for. "And if I refuse?" Ethan asked, his tone defiant, something he rarely dared with his father. Robert's smile was dark, almost sinister. "If you refuse, I'll ensure that Lana feels the weight of your decisions. I can have her removed from Empire Grand and ruin her career in the hotel industry. A negative recommendation from me is all it would take." Ethan remained silent, absorbing the heavy threat that hung in the air. His father's cruelty hit him hard, but he knew Robert was fully capable of following through. His influence was vast and could easily close doors for Lana everywhere. Ethan was well aware that Robert would always use his power to manipulate anyone in his way, and now Lana was the target. "Father, that's unfair. She's done nothing wrong. We've done everything to maintain professionalism and respect for Empire Grand," Ethan said, his voice filled with frustration and indignation. "Professionalism?" Robert let out a bitter laugh. "Professionalism means keeping focus on the business. Ethan, it means not letting frivolous feelings cloud your objectivity. I expected more from you." Ethan wanted to argue, to defend Lana, to defend them, but he realized that nothing would change his father's viewpoint. To Robert, the world was binary: success and failure, power and weakness. And in his view, any emotion that didn't directly serve business interests was a vulnerability to be eliminated. When the conversation ended, Ethan left his father's office feeling devastated. Robert's words echoed in his mind, and the threat against Lana weighed heavily on his heart. He knew he'd have to make a decision, but the thought of ending things with her to protect her career and peace felt unbearably unjust. He didn't know if he could live with that choice, but the alternative, seeing Lana suffer the consequences of his defiance, was equally painful. That evening, Ethan met with Lana in a small, secluded cafe, far from Empire Grand, where no one would see them together. He arrived early, his mind still swirling with conflicting thoughts that had haunted him since the conversation with Robert. When Lana arrived, he greeted her with a sad smile, unable to hide the worry on his face. "Ethan, is everything okay?" Lana asked, sitting across from him and immediately sensing something was wrong. He took a deep breath, looking at her with a mixture of love and sorrow. "Lana, I need to tell you something, and it's important." She looked at him intently, concerned but ready to hear whatever he had to say. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth. "My father found out about us," he said, his voice low but steady. "And he didn't take it well. He wants me to end our relationship. He thinks I'm compromising the family's image and the company." Lana felt the shock of his words, her heart pounding. She knew Robert was a rigid and controlling man, but she hadn't expected him to interfere so directly in Ethan's personal life. And seeing the pain on Ethan's face, she realized how much this choice was weighing on him. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." She held his hand in a gesture of support, even though her own mind was swirling with confusion and fear. He squeezed her hand as if it were his only anchor. "It's not just that, Lana. He threatened your career. He said that if I don't end things, he'll make sure you're removed from Empire Grand, and that no one else in the industry would want to hire you." Lana's heart sank. The thought of losing the job she loved, where she had poured so much of herself, was devastating. She knew Robert had the power to make that happen, and the sense of vulnerability made her tremble. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "So what does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling but determined. Ethan looked at her, torn between the love he felt and the responsibility he carried as his family's heir. He wanted to protect her, to defy his father and hold on to their relationship, but he knew the price could be too high for Lana. "Lana, I don't want you to suffer because of me. You deserve the best, a brilliant career. And I don't know if I'm ready to challenge my father to that extent," he confessed, his voice filled with pain. She looked at him in silence, understanding the depth of the dilemma he faced. Ethan had always borne the weight of Robert's expectations, and while part of her wanted to ask him to fight for them, another part knew he needed to find his path without added pressure. "Ethan, if that's what you need to do, I'll understand," she said, her heart heavy. "I know how much your family and Empire Grand mean to you." He lowered his head, his eyes full of barely contained tears. He didn't want to lose Lana, but he felt as though his world was crumbling, split between his love for her and his father's demands. "I need time to think," he murmured, his voice choked. "Just promise me that no matter what happens, you'll know that I love you." Lana nodded, feeling her own tears threaten, but she held his hand one last time, as if that touch were their silent goodbye. In that moment, they both knew they stood on the brink of a decision that would change everything. That night, after her conversation with Ethan, Lana returned home with a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil. His words, the impossible situation they faced, and Robert's threats weighed on her, making every step more difficult. Ethan was caught in a no-win situation. Although he loved her, he was trapped by his father's control and expectations, a man who wouldn't hesitate to ruin her career to get what he wanted. Lana spent the night wide awake, wrestling with the decision she knew she'd have to make. Deep down, she understood that staying with Ethan would come at too high a cost. She loved him more than she'd ever thought possible, but she also loved her independence, her career, and everything she'd worked so hard to build. To stay with him would be to risk everything she'd fought for, and it would also expose him to conflicts within his own family. It was a brutal situation, one that forced them to weigh what they held most dear. By morning, she had made up her mind. She would walk away. Lana knew Ethan would never agree, but she believed that by stepping away, she was not only protecting herself but also him. The family legacy, with all its weight and responsibility, was something Ethan had been carrying his entire life. As much as she hated the reality, she couldn't be the cause of more pain and division in his life. With her heart breaking, Lana dressed and went to work at Empire Grand, immersing herself in the day's routine, but now everything felt like a silent farewell. The hallway she had once walked with pride felt somber, and each familiar face that greeted her only tightened the knot in her chest. That day, she chose to be distant and cold with Ethan, ignoring any attempt on his part to start a conversation or share the silent glances they usually exchanged. She knew explaining her reasons would be impossible, but also that the longer she waited, the harder it would be to leave. After a grueling day, Lana prepared for the final moment she knew was inevitable. During a break, she sent a brief message, asking Ethan to meet her in the hotel garden at the end of the day. The garden at Empire Grand was a quiet, secluded place with neat rows of trees and shrubs, a small fountain in the center, and soft lighting that created a calm, intimate atmosphere as dusk fell. When Ethan arrived, Lana was standing beside the fountain, watching the water reflect the lights, lost in thought. He approached slowly, sensing that something was very wrong. "Lana, you've been so distant," he said, his voice low and full of concern. "Since yesterday, it feels like you're avoiding me. What's going on?" She took a deep breath before answering, fighting to keep her voice steady, though her heart was close to breaking. "Ethan, I've thought a lot about everything you told me. About your father, about his threats, and I think the only way to protect you and your life is to step away." He looked at her in disbelief, his face showing both pain and surprise. "Step away? Lana, I don't want you to do that. It doesn't have to be like this. We can face this together, we can." She shook her head, cutting him off gently. "Ethan, I know you want to, and I know you love me, but the weight of all this, your father, your family's empire, it's more than I can handle. And I don't want to be a source of pain or an obstacle in your life." He stepped closer, placing his hands gently but firmly on her shoulders. "Lana, you've never been an obstacle. Everything you've brought into my life has been meaningful. It's been love, something I never really felt before you. Please, don't go." She felt tears stinging her eyes but held back, putting a bit of space between them. She knew that if he saw how much it hurt, she wouldn't be able to go through with it. "Ethan, you were born with a legacy, with responsibilities that have always been there, waiting for you. I don't want to be the reason you walk away from that, or the reason your father jeopardizes your career, your reputation. I need to let you live what you were meant to, without any interference." He took a deep breath, trying to hide the pain that etched itself across his face. His gaze was full of despair and sadness, and Lana knew that for Ethan, this was more than just a goodbye. It was a loss he didn't want and couldn't accept. "So you're leaving me because of my father?" he murmured, his voice rough. "You're leaving me because he controls me to that degree?" She looked away, knowing the truth was more complex than that, but unable to explain everything going through her mind. Finally, she nodded, trying to keep calm even as her heart shattered. "Yes, Ethan. I'm walking away because I know that as long as I'm in your life, he'll always have something to hold against us. And I don't want to see you suffer, fighting your own family because of me. I can't do that to you." He closed his eyes as if taking in the pain of her words. Inside, he fought against the idea of letting her go, against the idea of losing the one person who had made him feel truly seen and loved for the first time. "Lana, please," he said, one last plea in his broken voice. "Don't give up on us." She felt the silent tears spill over but held her ground. She stepped closer and with a gentle touch, held his face between her hands, looking straight into his eyes. "Ethan, you'll always be a part of me, and I'll never forget what we shared. But right now, I need you to trust me and let me go. It's the only way you can fully live the life that's meant for you." With one last sad glance, she released him and without another word, turned and began to walk away from the garden. Each step was more painful than the last, as if she were leaving a part of herself behind. She heard his steps retreating slowly, feeling that he had reluctantly accepted her request. The days that followed were long and painful. For Lana, each minute at Empire Grand was a battle to stay professional and conceal the heartache she carried. She kept herself busy, diving into her work with an intensity that kept her from thinking about Ethan. But the memories were always there, lurking, ready to overwhelm her with a nearly unbearable sense of longing. Ethan, too, felt the weight of her absence. He noticed that meetings felt emptier, that the daily routine at the hotel seemed heavier, and that each decision was harder to make without Lana's silent support beside him. Her absence was like a shadow, an unfillable void that only grew with each passing day. He knew that she had made the choice to protect him and what he'd built, but that didn't make the pain any less, and the internal conflict between duty and love consumed him. One solitary night, as he gazed out over the New York skyline, Ethan began to think deeply about what truly mattered to him. Yes, he'd grown up in the shadow of Robert's expectations, raised to be the heir and leader of grand enterprises. But losing Lana made him realize that none of it held meaning if he couldn't live freely and choose his own path. For the first time, he understood that the real weight of his family legacy wasn't the work or the success. It was the constant sacrifice of himself to please the implacable figure of his father. Slowly, the idea of confronting Robert and reclaiming his right to make his own choices became a necessity. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he was determined to regain what truly mattered. With Lana, he discovered a side of himself he had never known. She had made him see that there was more to life than just power and control. And that night, as he looked at his reflection in the window, he made the hardest decision of his life. He would face his father and fight for what truly gave him purpose. He was tired of living a life ruled by fear and control. For the first time, Ethan wanted to be the master of his destiny, and that meant fighting for Lana's love. On the morning, Ethan resolved to confront his father. A surprising calm settled within him. He knew that standing up to Robert meant risking everything he had spent years building, but he also knew it was the only way to reclaim what truly mattered. During the days he'd spent apart from Lana, he realized that his position at Empire Grand, the status, and his father's approval held little value without her by his side. Lana had shown him something no promotion or family legacy could replace: true happiness and the freedom to make his own choices. That morning, Ethan walked toward his father's office with steady steps and his head held high. Every hallway, every detail of Empire Grand felt like a reflection of the life he'd lived until that moment. A path meticulously crafted by the Grand family, but one filled with limitations and unyielding expectations. He stopped before the massive mahogany door to Robert's office, took a deep breath, and knocked before entering. Robert sat behind his desk, surrounded by documents, exuding his usual aura of authority. He lifted his gaze when Ethan entered, but kept his face impassive. Robert knew his son would come to discuss the matter of Lana and waited with cold, calculated patience, confident that his perspective would prevail, as it always had. "Father, we need to talk," Ethan began, his voice low but firm. Robert crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing his son with a sharp gaze. "I think I know what this is about, but go on. I'm listening." Ethan took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage he had. He knew this was the defining moment of his life, the decision that would determine who he truly was and what he was willing to lose or gain. "I can no longer abide by the restrictions you impose on my personal life, Father," he said, his voice steady with determination. "I love Lana, and I won't let you manipulate or threaten her because of our relationship." Robert laughed, but it was a cold, dismissive laugh. "Love? Ethan, I thought I'd raised you to be more rational than that. This girl is nothing more than a distraction, a threat to your position. The real world demands sacrifices, and you should understand that by now." Ethan's heart pounded, but he didn't break eye contact. "I understand, Father. I understand that, to you, everything is about control and power. But I am not you, and I don't want to be. What I have with Lana is more real and more valuable than any position or status you can offer me." Robert narrowed his eyes, visibly irritated by his son's defiance. Seeing Ethan challenge his rules seemed to be the ultimate affront. "You're a Grand, Ethan, and Grands don't live by feelings. We live by logic and ambition. This girl will only destroy everything I've built for you. Is that what you want? To see your life fall apart over something so insignificant?" Robert's harsh words pierced Ethan, but instead of backing down, he felt even more resolute. For too long, he had allowed his father to dictate every part of his life, believing it was his duty to carry the family legacy without question. But now, thinking of Lana and the genuine happiness she brought him, he realized he was no longer willing to follow the rules Robert had imposed. "If my position here depends on me abandoning Lana, then I don't want it, Father," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm willing to give up Empire Grand, to walk away from everything if it means I can have a life with her." Robert stared at him, a mix of disbelief and anger in his gaze. For him, the idea of throwing away the family empire for love was incomprehensible, almost insulting. He had never imagined that Ethan would defy his orders so openly, especially for something he saw as trivial as a relationship. "You're insane, Ethan. You're willing to throw away everything we've built over a woman?" he demanded, his face hard, almost furious. Ethan managed a slight smile, but it was a sad, knowing smile. "Father, you built this empire on your own, but you never thought about how it affected others. I'm grateful for everything I've learned from you, for all I did to get here, but now I realize I need to find my own path. And Lana is part of that path, whether you approve or not." Robert stood, his anger unmistakable in his expression. "If you walk out of here, Ethan, you're renouncing the family legacy. I'll make sure you have no part in Empire Grand or any other business bearing my name." Ethan met his father's glare, feeling the weight of those words, yet certain he was making the right decision. "If that's what you want, then so be it. I'd rather live honestly with myself and alongside the woman I love than spend my life trying to fulfill an image you created for me." Without another word, Ethan turned and left the office. As he walked away, he felt a profound sense of liberation unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted, allowing him to breathe without the invisible chains his father had placed on him since childhood. He may have lost his position and everything his father had promised, but he'd gained something far more precious: the freedom to choose his own path. Leaving the office, Ethan knew exactly where he needed to go. He had to see Lana, to tell her what he'd done, and most of all, to show her that he was willing to make any sacrifice to be by her side. He knew she might have doubts, that she might question his choice, but he was determined to prove that, for the first time, he was making a truly meaningful decision on his own. He found her at a small park in the heart of New York, a place they often visited during their rare breaks together. Lana was seated on a bench, lost in thought, but when she saw him approaching, she stood immediately, surprised. "Ethan?" she said, her voice laced with hesitation and hope. "What happened?" He looked at her, his gaze full of emotion, and without another word, he took her hands in his, feeling the warmth and familiarity he'd longed for. "Lana, I just spoke with my father. I told him that for you, I'm willing to give up everything, the Empire Grand, the legacy, anything he thinks is more important than love. I can't and won't live my life bound by his demands, because you are the most real and meaningful thing I've found in all these years." She stood silent, taking in his words, her eyes filling with tears as she listened. She didn't know how to respond, but the love and courage she saw in Ethan made her heart swell with a happiness she had never known. "Ethan, you really did that?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. He nodded, his smile resolute. "Yes, and for the first time, I feel like I'm living according to what I truly believe. I chose you, Lana. One chose our love, our happiness, over any title or status." She looked at him for a few seconds, emotions overflowing in her gaze. And then, without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, holding him tight in a comforting embrace. She felt that, in that gesture, they were both healing from the pain and doubts they had faced together. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered, still holding him. "And all I wanted was for you to be able to make this choice for yourself, without your father's control. Thank you for believing in us." He held her even tighter, as if he wanted to preserve that moment forever, the moment they both chose freely what truly mattered. They were ready to face the future together, without fear and without regrets. In the days that followed, word spread quickly that Ethan had left Empire Grand. True to his word, Robert made sure his son had no remaining ties to the family empire, but Ethan had already come to terms with that decision. With Lana by his side, he felt more fulfilled and at peace than he had ever been. Together, Ethan and Lana began to build a new life, away from the pressures and power games. He reinvented himself, seeking new opportunities and projects that brought him genuine satisfaction. And Lana supported him, offering love and companionship every step of the way. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, but now, as equal partners, they had the strength and determination to face anything. For Ethan, the greatest legacy he could create wasn't the empire his father had built, but a life lived authentically alongside the person he truly loved. Months after Ethan made the life-changing decision to step away from his position at Grand Enterprises, he and Lana found themselves in a new phase of peace and happiness they could barely believe. Their lives had transformed completely, yet they'd found a harmony that seemed like a dream. Free from family pressures and the demands of Empire Grand, Ethan had the space to reinvent himself, rediscover his passions, and with Lana's unwavering support, uncover who he truly was. For Lana, things had also shifted in extraordinary ways. She continued working at Empire Grand, where, to her surprise, she was promoted to operations manager. The news was met with applause and celebration from her colleagues, who recognized her dedication and commitment. The new role allowed her to engage directly with high-level operations, a well-deserved recognition that filled her with pride. She knew success hadn't come easily, but with Ethan by her side, She felt ready to tackle any challenge. As the months passed, they began talking about formalizing their relationship. Now free from his family's pressures, Ethan was ready to take the next step. One sunny spring afternoon, they decided that instead of a grand ceremony, they wanted an intimate celebration, one filled with friends, close colleagues, and the people who had come to mean so much to them. On the eve of the event, Ethan felt a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension as he resolved to do something he'd never thought possible: reconnect with his father. Separating from Robert had been a difficult, painful choice, but he knew that anger and resentment shouldn't shape the rest of his life. Above all, Ethan wanted to open a new chapter, one free from the burdens of the past. That afternoon, he went to Robert's house. Robert looked visibly surprised to see him, but maintained his usual guarded demeanor. The time apart had created a silent rift between them, yet there was a certain vulnerability in Robert's expression that Ethan hadn't seen before. "Dad, I came here to clear things up between us," Ethan began calmly but with resolve. Robert studied him for a moment before replying. "I thought you'd chosen your own path, leaving mine behind, Ethan." "Yes, I did choose a path," Ethan responded firmly. "But that doesn't mean I wanted to leave everything behind. I chose Lana. I chose happiness with her, but I also want peace with everything I've been through here. I just need you to understand that my love for her isn't a failure, nor is it rebellion against you, and that making this decision wasn't easy." Robert was silent, his gaze softer than Ethan had ever seen it. For the first time, he seemed to look at his son differently, finally seeing the maturity and courage that Ethan had shown by pursuing his ideals in the face of such enormous pressure. "You know, Ethan," Robert began, his voice softer and more reflective than usual, "when your mother passed, I dedicated every minute of my life to building this empire. I thought if I focused on creating something invincible, I could protect you from all the uncertainties and hardships. But maybe, in doing that, I lost sight of what truly matters." The sincerity in his father's words took Ethan by surprise. For the first time, Robert was revealing a genuine regret, something Ethan never expected to witness. "Maybe I was too harsh on you. And if that cost us our relationship, then perhaps I failed in something far more important than the family legacy," Robert admitted, his eyes glistening slightly. Ethan felt a wave of emotion, years of resentment slowly dissipating. He moved closer to his father and, in a gesture they had both avoided for years, extended his hand. Robert took it, and they looked at each other, now with the understanding that reconciliation was possible. They didn't need words to forgive one another. The silence and mutual understanding were stronger than anything that could be said. They were ready to start anew. A few days later, the special event at Empire Grand arrived, a grand charity ball to support social causes, organized by Lana and Ethan. After reconciling, Ethan and Robert decided together that he would return to Empire Grand, but in a new role, one where he could work side by side with Lana and prioritize projects they truly believed in. The charity ball, an event Lana had always dreamed of hosting, was the perfect way to celebrate this fresh beginning. The ballroom at Empire Grand was breathtakingly beautiful, decorated with twinkling lights and elegant floral arrangements. Classical musicians played in the background, creating a sophisticated yet welcoming atmosphere. The event had drawn investors, celebrities, close friends, and colleagues who, at last, were privy to the true nature of Ethan and Lana's relationship. They walked around the room, arm in arm, exchanging smiles and greetings with guests, now fully accepted and respected as a couple, both inside and outside of work. When it was time for the speeches, Lana was the first to take the stage. Standing before the crowd, she felt a surge of pride and joy as she looked around at the familiar and new faces. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "This event represents so much more than just a noble cause. It marks the start of a new phase for Empire Grand, one that prioritizes the people and the purposes that truly matter." Applause filled the room, and she glanced at Ethan, who stood nearby, beaming with pride. Then he took the microphone, his voice resonating across the hall. "I want to thank you all for being here and for your unwavering support of Empire Grand. But tonight, I want to especially thank Lana, who is the heart of this event and everything we are building here. With her, I learned there is something far more powerful than a legacy of power and status. And with her, I discovered that love, dedication, and the courage to be ourselves without limitations are the true legacy I want to create." The crowd erupted into applause, and emotional smiles spread across the room. For many, this was a new side of Ethan, someone who had once seemed impenetrable, but now revealed a more human, inspiring aspect. As he stepped down from the stage, Lana greeted him with an embrace, feeling the profound love and admiration they shared. The event continued with dancing and lively conversations. By the end of the night, Ethan and Lana, exhausted yet happy, watched the ballroom empty as the last lights still glowed and the musicians had long since left. Alone at Empire Grand, a hotel that now held an entirely new meaning for them, Ethan took Lana's hand gently and looked into her eyes with a peaceful and fulfilled expression. "We did it, Lana. We faced it all, and here we are, together. I could never have imagined having so much, and at the same time, someone so special by my side." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder as they savored the moment. "I think love really can change everything, Ethan," she murmured softly. "And I'd do it all again, for you." They danced slowly in the silence of the empty ballroom, enveloped by a quiet, complete happiness. Empire Grand, which had witnessed so many moments of doubt and challenge, was now the stage for a new beginning. Lana and Ethan, after all they had faced, finally had something that no barrier or hardship could destroy: a life and love built together, rooted in trust, respect, and the freedom to be themselves. As the first rays of morning sunlight streamed into the ballroom, softly illuminating both of them, Ethan knew they had begun the most important chapter of their lives. Together, they were unstoppable, and they were ready to write a story where love, courage, and authenticity would always be the guiding themes.